For those of you who might be wondering what this is, it's a compilation of my 1920 news videos that cover the issues of midweek Pictorial from the spring of 1920. It's hard to believe that after all of those midweek Pictorial videos I've made, we're still only less than halfway through 1920. And for the two people who noticed, yes, I did skip the January and February issues, because I haven't had time to re-record the older ones. But depending on how this video performs, I might consider doing it in the future. The ones for spring 1920 were mostly already up to my current quality standard, so no re-recording was required, but I did have to slow down the audio a little bit on the earlier ones. I can't believe how fast I used to talk when recording. Listening back on my older videos, it sounds like I'm hopped up on something. Well, anyway, this intro is super boring, so let's get into it. An alleged rum revolt by residents of Iron River, Michigan against the enforcement of the Prohibition law was of short duration. Arrests have been made of some Italians who were making and storing liquor in defiance of the law. The local authorities seem to have sympathized with the arrested men and were accused of threatening and arresting the federal officers. Major A.V. Dalrymple, federal prohibition agent for the central western states, assembled a posse and went to Iron River to quell the alleged revolt. He smashed some barrels of wine and had a wordy combat with the local district attorney, who was stated to have been abusive. Later, government officials took control of the situation, and Dalrymple and his men retired. The matter is now under investigation. Photo caption: 8 barrels of wine were broached and destroyed at Iron River under the supervision of Major A.V. Dalrymple. Town and county officials of Iron County, Michigan, who clashed with the federal authorities on the question of prohibition. Left to right are Sheriff Robert Wilson, District Attorney Martin McDonough, and Chief of Police Sensiba. Famous old Forum Bar in Oakland, California that is now a haberdashery. All the fixtures of the old saloon, bar rail, mirrors, cracker and cheese receptacles, etc., have been retained, and the proprietor makes advertising capital out of the unique establishment. Governor Edwards of New Jersey signing the bill legalizing the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages containing 3.5% alcohol, after peace shall have been formally declared by the United States. A formidable legal fight is in prospect. For the first time, a police barracks in Ulster was attacked by Sinn Feiners about the middle of February. Over 150 masked and armed men raided the Ballytrain Barracks, County Monaghan, at 2 a.m. The attack lasted 3 hours, and then the garrison surrendered. 7 policemen were injured, 3 seriously. The damage done is shown above. Wounded police in Carrickmacross Hospital after the attack on the police barracks. Left to right are Constable Ruddy, Sergeant Lawton, and Constable Murtaugh. The barracks and an adjoining grocery store were blown up by the assailants before the garrison surrendered. Funeral in Limerick, Ireland of a citizen killed in a street battle between soldiers and civilians. The local clergy, wearing white sashes, are seen walking at the head of the procession. 40 armed soldiers are reported to have been patrolling the streets when revolver shots were fired by some civilians. The patrol returned the fire with fatal results. A girl of 21 was mortally wounded, and a man instantly killed. The Meteor, formerly the steam yacht of the ex-Kaiser, now flying the British flag. She is here shown leaving Liverpool on her first trip. She was originally owned by the Hamburg American Line, and was chartered by the ex-Kaiser as a pleasure yacht. Before the war, the vessel was frequently mentioned in the news. It was several times at the English regatta at Cowes. Major R.W. Schroeder, daring aviator, who on February 27th reached a greater height in the air than had ever been attained by man. He ascended to an altitude of 36,020 feet. All altitude aviation records were smashed on February 27th, when Major R.W. Schroeder and an airplane reached a height of 36,020 feet. This was about 5,000 feet higher than the previous record established by Rolfs. At nearly 7 miles above the ground, the Major lost consciousness, and his machine fell until he was nearly 2,000 feet above the ground, when it righted itself and glided to a graceful landing. Schroeder was found sitting in his machine apparently lifeless. He was rushed to a hospital. He was temporarily blinded but will recover. The exhaustion of his oxygen tanks had caused the accident. Major Schroeder with his oxygen helmet in place. Note the tube running from the tank to his mouth. Had this broken, he would have strangled for lack of air. Comparative chart which is self-explanatory, showing the altitudes reached at various times by daring air navigators. Navy balloon that made a flight through a blizzard from Rockaway Point to Quebec, Canada. It was commanded by Lieutenant A.R. Houghton. There were 2 other balloons of the same type that started at the same time, but Lieutenant Houghton was the winner of the race. Smuggling by means of airplanes has become a very profitable trade in Holland, Germany, and Spain. Especially between Holland and Germany has this been extensive and easy. The packages smuggled are usually flat but valuable, consisting of gold or securities. German police aviators are shown scrutinizing contents of plane. A remarkable performance was recently given by an East Indian in Germany. Wildfa Bahu permitted himself to be buried alive for 8 days. In the picture at left, his body is shown doubled up so as to occupy the smallest possible space and wrapped in burlap. Official witnesses are recording the circumstances. He was buried several feet underground without food, water, or air. His hand remains exposed to show that he is really there. At right, he is seen being resurrected at the expiration of 8 days, apparently none the worse for the experience. Emancipation of women in Turkey is emphasized by this picture of a Turkish woman, Naki Hanum, making a speech at Constantinople in protest against Allied demands. Secretary of War Baker presenting a silk American flag to a picked troop of New York Girl Scouts. The ceremony took place on the roof of the Hotel Belmont, New York, February 28th. The flag was given for services during the war. Great socialist demonstration in Paris before the railway strike was called that has kept France in a ferment during the past weeks. The banner reads, "The Union of Workers will make the peace of the world." The meeting was addressed by fiery agitators. American soldiers supervising the distributing of American flour to women of Montenegro. So great was the destitution that when the flour arrived, hundreds of the famished inhabitants descended on the warehouses to snatch a portion. The soldiers were called in to ensure fair distribution. Thousands of German students on way to the university where a large demonstration was held against the surrender to the Allies for trial of Germans charged with war crimes. Mass meeting in the Busch Gardens at Berlin on January 25th to protest against the Allied demand for the rendition of war criminals. Nissen huts used as temporary dwellings at Péronne, France, while more durable and commodious houses are being erected. The progress of reconstruction is necessarily slow, owing to the lack of building material and funds, while the great loss of manpower in the war is also a retarding factor. Péronne was twice taken and recaptured in the war and was almost utterly destroyed. Temporary church erected near or on the site of the former church at Merald. A funeral service is in progress. Caves have been dug in the sides of hills, and in other cases, dugouts formerly occupied by the fighting armies have been utilized as dwellings by French families, as in this case at Lens. The shortage of labor is so acute in the devastated regions of France that women and even children are employed in work suitable to their strength. The photograph here shown was taken near Lens. The members of a little family who have been engaged in rebuilding their shattered house near Péronne are here pictured at their midday meal among the ruins. All that is attempted at present is to secure a habitable dwelling even of the rudest kind, and ornament or decoration are wholly out of the question. A generation must pass before reconstruction is complete. Religious feeling is deep in the hearts of French country people, and rites and ceremonies are observed as before the war. In the picture are seen children who have just taken their first communion, headed by the parish priest. One of the principles that guided to a large extent the deliberations of the peace conference was that of the self-determination of peoples. The application of the principle was at times very difficult, and in certain cases arrangements were made for a popular vote in the districts involved. The elections were to be carried out under the supervision of the League of Nations, and in order that they might be fair, German troops were required to evacuate the region while the voting went on. The first plebiscite was held in the northern zone of the Schleswig, February 10th, and the vote was 3-1 for reunion of the zone with Denmark. Photo caption: Flags of the British, French, Norwegian, and Swedish commissions in Flensborg, Schleswig. Great German demonstration in Flensborg, Schleswig, on the occasion of German troops evacuating the territory before the voting took place as to whether the northern zone should remain German or be reunited with Denmark. By the terms of the treaty, German troops were to be withdrawn before the voting. German cavalry in a farewell parade in Flensborg before they withdrew from the northern section of Schleswig. Although the Danish element predominated in the zone, as was later shown by the vote of 3-1 in favor of Danish sovereignty, there was a large German population, and they did all they could to give their compatriots a royal farewell. French Marines from the SS Marseillais and English Marines from HMS Carysford marching through Flensborg headed by band of French chasseurs. Map showing the Schleswig zones subject to plebiscite. The northern zone had its election February 10th, and the result was overwhelmingly in favor of Denmark. Of 100,000 votes, 75,000 were Danish and 25,000 German. German soldiers packing up personal and war material preparatory to evacuating the Schleswig northern zone before the voting took place. The election was impartial and was under the direction of Allied and neutral commissions. German troops at right are seen leaving Schleswig in accordance with peace treaty terms, while the French are coming in to assist in assuring a free and fair expression of the people's will. The band of chasseurs alpins are sounding a salute from their trumpets. Representative of the French government, Colonel Maurice Hu, presenting certificates of honor to the next of kin of American soldiers who perished in the war. The ceremony took place at the 13th Regiment Armory in Brooklyn, New York on February 22nd. A great throng crowded the huge armory, and the ceremonies arranged by the American Legion included national anthems and patriotic airs. Lady Astor, the American woman recently elected as a member of the British Parliament, speaking in behalf of children at the Mansion House. In foreground are two Serbian war orphans, who are earning their living by serving water to travelers on the express trains between Belgrade, Serbia, and Bucharest, Romania. They have to carry the water for miles and sell it for what is the equivalent in American money of 2 cents a cup. This ingenious contrivance will appeal to most owners of automobiles who have been compelled to crawl beneath their cars to repair them. It consists of a cradle on which the car can be run, and which can then be tilted to any required angle so that repairs can be easily made. Babyland's Syncopated Orchestra, which is the smallest band in the world. The little ones have been taught to beat drums, ring bells, and clash cymbals, which they do creditably, to the accompaniment of their teacher on the piano. It is not drudgery to them, for they look forward to it with delight. The school is at Notting Hill, England. Marshal Foch at left and General Maxime Weygand, his chief of staff, taking a quiet walk through a French park. The great soldier is most modest and unassuming. The contrast between his present life and the strenuous one of the war period is striking. Mysterious sinking of the steamer Moccasin at her pier in Brooklyn, New York, March 2nd. The ship with a heavy list is here seen going down. She was formerly the Prinz Joachim. An Albanian bey surrounded by his bodyguard, all armed to the teeth, each having revolver, rifle, and bowie knife. His followers are devoted to him. Celebration in memory of Czechoslovak soldiers who have perished on the battlefields of the Allied nations. The memorial services were held in Prague in front of the National Museum. Prague is the capital of the new republic and is a city of great industrial and political importance. The Czechoslovak soldiers won a renown for bravery in their campaign in Russia, when they successfully resisted the attempts of the Bolshevist authorities to disarm them while they were trying to make their way to Vladivostok. Slovaks in their picturesque costumes attending church on Sunday morning. The Slovaks, who are now united politically with the Czechs in the new Czechoslovak Republic, are chiefly engaged in agricultural and forestry pursuits. They have a language and literature of their own. 3/4 of the population are of the Roman Catholic faith. The Slovak national dance, the odziemek, characterized by great fervor and animation. The picturesque national dress lends interest to the participants and the occasion. The people are naturally gay and fond of music and dancing, and now that the harsh yoke of the Habsburg monarchy has been removed and they have a government of their own, life has taken on a still greater zest and meaning. Radicals deported from the United States in the Soviet Ark Buford, carrying their baggage and climbing the bank of the Sisterbach River after they had crossed the border between Finland and Russia. Guard of Honor and Soviet standard-bearers drawn up on the Russian side of the Russo-Finnish border to extend a cordial greeting to the revolutionaries deported to Russia from this country. Enthusiastic throngs turned out to greet the highest American officer of the army when General Pershing made an outdoor address at the pavilion in Balboa Park. The general stated that it was the largest throng that he had ever addressed. General Pershing on February 28th inspected the Army cantonment at Camp Dix, New Jersey. He reviewed the 45th and 57th Regiments, spent several hours in the Americanization schools, and complimented the teachers on their work. An excellent photograph of General Pershing and Governor Coolidge of Massachusetts, taken recently at the State House in Boston. On his visit of inspection to Camp Jackson, South Carolina, General Pershing met Governor Cooper of that state, who is here seen at left. The general's tour has increased talk of him as a presidential nominee. At Fort Bliss, Texas, General Pershing was greeted most heartily both by the soldiers and civilians. He was on familiar ground, as he had seen service in Mexico, and was there brought into a prominence that led to higher appointment. Detachment of the 31st American Infantry guarding a section of the Trans-Siberian Railroad in vicinity of Vladivostok. An American flag being presented to Major E.J. Swift, Center, by grateful Montenegrin soldiers in recognition of American aid. There was no American flag to be obtained in Montenegro, so a colored poster was used with the flag pictured upon it as a pattern. American sentry guarding a tunnel on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The cold and snow make his work arduous. United States soldiers are now being withdrawn through the port of Vladivostok, and in a short time all of them will be on their way home. A remarkable photograph of the varied types of soldiers who make up the International Police of Vladivostok. They are used for patrolling the streets and keeping order in that disturbed seaport. Left to right are a Russian, Japanese infantryman, Japanese sailor, American Marine, American Blue Jacket, Czechoslovak, Italian, British, American, Japanese, and Russian regular. The influence of the Bolshevist government has reached across Siberia, and a Soviet form of municipal rule has been established in Vladivostok. On top of hill is the Near East Relief Mission compound, where American relief workers and their charges were besieged for 3 weeks while Turkish soldiers massacred Armenians by thousands. Armenian women and children who escaped the massacre waiting to receive food. Once more, the world has been shocked by the news that Armenians by the thousands have fallen victims to the ferocity of the Turks. At Marash in Cilicia, in the latter days of January, an unprovoked attack began, and for 3 weeks a veritable reign of terror existed, while Armenian men, women, and children were hunted out and shot down by the Turkish nationalist troops. The French troops in the vicinity were too small to prevent the catastrophe. American relief workers in their compounds near the city were under a constant rain of bullets while the murders were in progress. The arrival of French reinforcements finally enabled surviving Armenians to escape to a place of safety outside the city, and some of them are here seen waiting for the rations doled out by the relief workers. The Sultan of Turkey, Mohammed VI, at left, in his throne room talking with Major Davis Arnold, Director General of Near East Relief. The Sultan is approachable and genial, and under his rule many of the restrictions formerly in vogue have been relaxed. The Sultan's private mosque, only a few hundred feet away from the Yildiz kiosk. It is called the Mosque of Hamidiye. Every Friday, the Sultan, Mohammed VI, spends some time there at his private devotions. Group of the Sultan's aides and military advisors photographed on the steps of the palace in Constantinople. At right is an American officer on duty in the Turkish capital. The monuments of the Tsarist regime are being dismantled or destroyed as rapidly as possible in Soviet Russia. The statue of Alexander III is here shown being taken apart. It is to be re-erected in one of the museums. Imperial insignia are also being taken down or erased from public buildings. Another view is here shown of the Alexander III statue with the crowned head lying on the ground. Obelisk erected to the memory of the Russian author Andreev, who died during the war. His death was hastened by the excitement of a Bolshevist raid near the town where he was residing. He was a writer of great ability, though his works are characterized by horror and morbid introspection. One of the most interesting photographs recently brought from Bolshevist Russia is this one, showing a chorus singing at the foot of the Andreev obelisk, erected to the memory of the famous Russian author in a square of Moscow. Immense throngs attended the ceremonies. Smoking ruins of the famous Hotel Chamberlain at Old Point Comfort, Virginia, photographed from the air. The loss is more than $1 million. New Brunswick, New Jersey, looking north on Albany Street, showing autos and trucks trying to cross the flooded area. The high water mark reached is shown by the ice on the fence, buildings, and telegraph poles. Rowboats are being used as conveyances. The flood was caused by a combination of heavy rains, a sudden thaw, and ice jams in the Raritan River. Washouts occurred on parts of the railroads in the state which, in conjunction with all the eastern Atlantic states, caught the tail end of the blizzard which came in from the west on March 6th. New York in winter. At the right may be seen Dr. Friedman's invention that removes ice and snow at the rate of 5 miles an hour. An endless chain of buckets, revolving in front, carries the snow into a hopper at the rear, whence it is removed to trucks. Spectacular fire caused in Chicago by a gas main being ignited by the blowing out of an electric fuse. For a time, the fire proved most obstinate, and frequent explosions threatened the destruction of a large amount of property in the south side section of the city. The firemen were compelled to work for 20 hours before the flames were extinguished. Funeral at Paris of Gaby Delis, the actress, well known on the stages of Europe and America. She died recently after a long and distressing illness. Perhaps in no other capital of the world than Paris would such a scene be possible. The hearse was covered with flowers sent by friends and admirers, and thousands of Parisians turned out to pay the last tribute. She had accumulated a considerable fortune, which was willed by her to the poor of Marseille, her native city. German soldiers laying wreaths on statue of Kaiser Wilhelm I in Danzig before evacuating that city. The great seaport on the Vistula that had immense commercial and political value to Germany passed from its control in January when it became a free city under the supervision of the League of Nations. The Germans constitute the moneyed mercantile class of the city, and their rights are safeguarded. The predominating influence henceforth will be Polish. The tiny Tom Thumb household and miniature furniture used by the smallest couple on Earth. The furniture is to be put in a special museum at Middlesboro, Massachusetts. The little man here seen is Count Magri, the second husband of Mrs. Tom Thumb. Photograph which has just arrived in this country showing the King and Queen of Spain among the workmen of a new plant that had just been opened in Madrid. Whatever the troubles that have swept over Spain, chiefly disputes between capital and labor, there is no denying the remarkable popularity of the royal family. The king is democratic and approachable, and the queen, formerly Princess Ina of England, is said to be the most beautiful queen in Europe. A great crowd of enthusiastic spectators witnessed the revival of an old custom at Ashbourne, Derbyshire, England, on February 17th, when a game of football was played in the river at that place. The teams, which could have as many players as they chose, were divided into the upwards and the downwards, according to the position they faced. The downwards are here shown making a determined attack. The game was rough and the water cold, but the ardor of both players and onlookers was at fever heat. In the background is the noble Lincoln Memorial Building at Washington. The exterior has been practically completed, and the interior is nearly finished. As can be seen, however, a great deal remains to be done before the grounds are properly laid out. The National Cemetery at Arlington at the nation's capital is the resting place of many of the nation's most distinguished dead. Its most beautiful feature is the amphitheater, herewith shown, designed for memorial services in honor of those who have nobly served their country. Near view of the amphitheater dedicated to the nation's heroic dead, showing stage where memorial services are held. Cloister of the amphitheater built of American marble and costing $825,000, now nearing completion. Huge Vickers Vimy passenger machine at Cairo, Egypt, where it was being tuned up for the last leg of the flight to Cairo. It had successfully negotiated the first stage from London to Cairo. General view of aeronautical show at the 71st Regiment Armory, New York. It is an impressive demonstration of the vast strides that have been made of late in the field of aviation. Mail, commercial, and individual machines are shown, together with latest types of motors. Regulars and rookies of the New York Giants tossing the medicine ball about on their training field at San Antonio, Texas. Babe Ruth, greatest batter in either of the major leagues, who is counted on for many home runs this season for the Yankees. At left is manager McGraw of the Giants, standing beside George Kelly, who will probably succeed Hal Chase at first base. Carl Mays, probably greatest underhand pitcher in the game. Miller Huggins, manager of the Yankees, batting flies to fielders at Jacksonville, Florida. Diamond at Jacksonville, Florida, where the players of the New York American League team are getting into shape for a season's playing which they hope will win for them the pennant. Child patients at Dr. Planta's open-air sanitarium at St. Moritz, Switzerland. The advocates of fresh air as a means of preserving or regaining health may find reinforcement for their theories in this picture. The children are thinly clad, and in some cases almost without any clothing, and the temperature often hovers about 0. Yet here they are enjoying a sledding party, and apparently do not suffer from the cold. Children at a Swiss sanitarium attending lessons in the open air. The elevation is high and the temperature extremely cold, but if the children are conscious of any discomfort, they do not show it in their faces. The treatment is said to be extremely efficacious, and a remarkable percentage of cures is reported. St. Moritz is a great winter pleasure and health resort, and the air, if cold, is very dry. Money, chiefly in pennies, collected in small barrels by New York schoolboys for the starving children of Armenia and Syria. As the result of 3 days' work among their classmates, they collected $86.85, and are here seen emptying their barrel before the members of the relief committee to be counted and forwarded. Scale model of the mammoth dirigible hangar to be erected by the Navy Department at Lakehurst, New Jersey. The hangar will be 800 feet long, 265 feet wide, and 74 feet high. It can hold a 10 million cubic foot airship. Young inventor who, with his wireless telephone, can hear 1,000 miles away. An interesting and important application of a now familiar principle has been made by a young Kansas inventor, Robert K. Trump of Topeka. He has contrived a generator of sufficient power to enable him to talk easily with people as far distant from Topeka as New York. Recently, he overheard a conversation between Robert F. Gowan, chief engineer of the DeForest Radio Telephone and Telegraph Company, and R.H.G. Matthews, a Chicago amateur, when they were trying out a generator of but 1/3 of 1 kilowatt power, and a new vacuum tube called the Oscillon. He is a musician also, and with the saxophone that is seen at the right, he frequently entertains fellow amateurs hundreds of miles away. Mr. Trump was formerly a sailor. Robert K. Trump, at left, a former sailor, only 21 years old, showing the generator of his wireless telephone to a visitor. Living in Topeka, Kansas, he can hear music played in New York. Signpost at Doorn, the little Dutch village 11 miles from Utrecht, Holland, which is to be the future place of residence of the ex-Kaiser, and which just now has special interest. Little island of Villingen, in the Zuid Zee, temporary home of the German ex-crown prince. It was reported March 17th that a Dutch torpedo boat had entered the harbor to guard it. 12-foot fence with barbed wire top placed about Amerongen Castle to protect Wilhelm's privacy. Present residence of ex-crown prince at Villingen. Curtains drawn to thwart the curiosity or enterprise of photographers make it look deserted. Wood cut by ex-Kaiser at Amerongen. He has sawed up 16,000 trees. Iron fencing placed about the ex-Kaiser's new estate at Doorn, Holland, to preserve the owner from intrusion by the curious. Last Germans to leave Danzig when by the terms of the peace treaty they were compelled to evacuate the city, which they did most reluctantly. In view of the imminent possibility of a clash between the Germans and Poles when the former were required to evacuate, French troops were sent to maintain order. They are here being reviewed by Generals Dupont and Hacking. Monument of Kaiser Wilhelm I, where the German troops made a great demonstration just before they were compelled to leave the city. Before the demonstration ended, the statue was fairly buried in flowers. Map of Germany showing how the various districts were affected by the sudden revolt in Berlin that, temporarily at least, drove the established Ebert government from the capital. The south in general stood by Ebert, while the northern section rather inclined toward the new regime. The first photograph that the president has permitted to be taken of him since his illness began was secured March 17th and is reproduced above. He wore a golf cap and was seated beside Mrs. Wilson. In Transylvania, it is the custom for marriageable girls to carry their dowries on their chests. Prospective swains can tell without asking just how much money the girl can bring to the new household by simply calculating the value of the coins that stud the breastplate. An almost miraculous escape was recorded when Tom Mix, one of the drivers in an auto race recently held at Santa Monica, California, was circling the track at a terrific rate of speed and his machine overturned. The spectators were horrified, as they thought that a tragedy had happened. But with the laconic remark, "narrow escape," the driver crawled from beneath the car uninjured. Dangerous ice jams on the Susquehanna, near Port Deposit, Maryland, that was only broken after Army aviators for 2 days had rained bombs upon it. It took 4 heavy bombing planes dropping 500-pound TNT torpedoes to break the barricade and start the ice moving. The opening of the channel averted the danger of a freshet following a thaw. The American bluejackets of the Atlantic Fleet, which has been on a prolonged cruise in southern waters, find that life is not a perpetual grind. Some of them are here seen on leave, and starting out for a ride in one of the quaint mule-drawn streetcars which form the chief means of conveyance in Bridgetown, Barbados, British West Indies. This lady of color is not troubled by prohibition laws in Bridgetown, British West Indies. She is really a perambulating bar, and the way she serves beer to thirsty clients, among whom many sailors of the Atlantic Fleet are included, is shown in the picture. She rinses the glasses in the pail of water on her arm. Railroad station at Batignolles, France, guarded by soldiers during the Great Strike that threatened to paralyze France and cause the overthrow of the Mitterrand cabinet. The government ran many of the trains through former employees called back into military service. When the railway strike went into effect, hundreds of thousands of commuters to towns adjoining Paris were compelled to use the suburban trolley cars. Some are here seen besieging the cars, which could only accommodate a fraction of those who wished to ride. Monsieur Chavreau, secretary of one of the railway unions, addressing strikers at Vincennes. The weakness of the strike lay in the fact that only 50% quit work. Ticket windows closed in the empty station of the Lyon station in Paris at the height of the strike. The strike, which was finally called off at midnight of March 1st after running less than 2 weeks, was a failure largely because it was dictated by political motives and did not have the sympathy or support of the great body of workmen. The government broke the strike by calling former railway workers into military service. Irish horse at Rathfarnham, Ireland being broken in. He has almost cleared the shafts, but is effectively held in check by ropes about his legs. His knees are padded to prevent injury. Sports at Eton, the famous English school for boys. A steeplechase is in progress, and the boys have nearly completed passage of water hazard. Photograph of Joe White, University of Pennsylvania rowing coach, showing a member of his crew his faults before a mirror, where the rower can see for himself how well he is profiting by the lesson. First girl conductor on a bus line that has been established in Tokyo, Japan. The service went into force on the 2nd of February 1920. Lucia and Simplicio Godeno, little Filipino twins whose bodies are united at the sides. They are healthy and vigorous boys, perfectly normal in other respects. They live in Washington with their guardian, Commissioner Yaugco of the Philippine Islands. Surgeons at Johns Hopkins say that the twins could be separated without danger, but no operation has been yet performed. New electrocution chamber at Sing Sing prison. At right is door where condemned man enters. In back, at left of death chair, is place where electrician stands to throw on the switch. The Flying Fish, a 12-passenger hydroplane operated between Palm Beach and points in the West Indies. Its decoration is bizarre, and it never lacks passengers. A similar type was on exhibition at the New York Aeronautical Show. Seen outside the House of Commons as Mr. Asquith entered to take his seat as member from Paisley. He was tendered a remarkable reception by throngs that crowded about him and cheered him wildly. Over-enthusiastic partisans almost mobbed the carriage of Mr. Asquith, and one is here seen being chased over the top of the car. Mr. Asquith reading congratulatory messages at home. He had just returned after his great victory at Paisley, Scotland, which was announced on February 28th. At Euston Station, he had received a tumultuous welcome from a large gathering, and the welcome continued all along the route to his house in Cavendish Square. The way Mr. Asquith's car looked on the morning following the remarkable ovation accorded to him on his return to the House of Commons. Even affection and admiration may be embarrassing at times, as is shown by the dilapidated condition of the machine rushed by his friends. It was estimated that $500 would be required for repairs. The new republics created in Europe have fallen heir to a multitude of problems, chiefly of food, fuel, and reconstruction. Of them all, Poland and Czechoslovakia are perhaps the more fortunately situated, because their natural resources are great. Our pictures show interesting events in both republics. Posen, which is naturally and predominantly Polish, was recovered by the Poles early in 1919, and the first anniversary of the city's liberation from German rule was celebrated recently with both Paderewski and Pilsudski in attendance. No less enthusiasm was manifested in Prague when the blood of the populace was stirred by the return of veterans who had won glory on Siberian fields. Photo caption: President Masaryk of the new Republic of Czechoslovakia kissing the colors of a regiment of veterans just returned to Prague after 5 years of service in Siberia. The city turned out en masse on that occasion. Paderewski speaking in Posen on anniversary of liberation of city from German rule. General Pilsudski, President of the new Polish Republic, in Posen on the occasion of the first anniversary of the city's change of rulers. Welcome home parade of Czechoslovak veterans who had fought gallantly for 5 years in Siberia. Rain fell in torrents, but a welcome was extended by tremendous crowds of citizens. St. Patrick's Day Parade, New York, March 17, 1920. One of the striking features of the parade was a number of boys wearing costumes of all the ancient Gaelic clans. Reviewing stand in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, where city and state officials watched the 25,000 marchers in the St. Patrick's Day Parade go by. On the stand, left to right, are Judge Mulqueen, Mayor Hylan, Eamon de Valera, head of the Irish Republic movement, and Governor Smith. Thousands of children in gala dress walked in the parade and formed one of its most picturesque and attractive elements. They carried Irish flags, and in many cases, Irish colors were sewn on their garments. The dendrograph, an invention which, placed around a tree, registers its rate of growth. Growth is recorded on a circular drum. In towns of the new Republic of Czechoslovakia, the authorities are making haste to remove from public buildings all signs in the Hungarian language. Veteran Czechoslovak troops who have returned to Prague, the capital of their new republic, after valiant fighting in Siberia, where they formed the nucleus of Allied anti-Bolshevist forces. Czech and Slovak girls in their picturesque national costumes gathered at the Wilson Railroad Station in Prague to greet the soldiers returning from the Siberian fighting front. The occasion was made a gala one, and the greater part of the population of the capital turned out to give a great ovation to the men who had shed luster on the national arms. Preparing the new harbor at Pressburg, which is destined to become one of the greatest commercial ports of southeastern Europe. It will be especially valuable in fostering trade with Yugoslavia. Pressburg is the center of a great wheat and wine growing district. The principal articles of commerce are silk, champagne, spirits, gloves, furniture, and musical instruments. The town is strongly fortified and has a population of nearly 100,000. Czechoslovak soldiers marching past the statue of Empress Marie Theresa in the principal square of Pressburg. The latter city, which formerly belonged to Hungary, will be the greatest Danubian port of the new Czechoslovak Republic and has a future of great commercial promise. Wonderful view of some of New York's skyscrapers, as seen from a Navy dirigible that recently circled above the city. Most prominent of all is the Woolworth Building, the highest in the world, 750 feet, seen in the immediate foreground. At the lower left are shown the Post Office Building and City Hall Park. Beyond are the huge beehives of business, almost every one sheltering thousands of workers. Mighty office buildings which, from a height of 2,000 feet, look almost like toy blocks. This view covers New York's financial district, and these buildings house great institutions whose ramifications extend to all quarters of the globe. The streets between the buildings are like the bottoms of great canyons, and the inmates of a single building often equal the population of a city. Times Square and Longacre Square as seen from half a mile in the air. It is the heart of the city's hotel and theater district. At left is the Times Building, Broadway and 42nd Street. At right foreground is the New York Public Library, one of the most beautiful structures in America, 5th Avenue from 40th to 42nd Street. At left foreground is Bryant Park. The Broad Street is the famous 42nd Street thoroughfare. Blowing up bridges and railway tracks at Camp Humphreys near Washington. This forms part of the practice of an engineer corps stationed at that place, and embodies the lessons taught by the war. The photographer has caught the scene at the instant of the explosion. Part of the crew of the Norwegian bark Sinneg, which sprang a leak and sank March 7th when 850 miles east of the Virginia Capes. The vessel had left Norfolk, Virginia 10 days before, bound for Italy. When she became waterlogged, the crew took to the boats, of which one was commanded by the captain and the other by the mate. After drifting and battling ocean gales for 11 days, the captain's boat was sighted and the inmates rescued by the Varley. The other boat has not been heard from. It is said that at one time it was planned to kill the dog mascot here shown to supply food for the crew. With every spring, a vast amount of ice floats down the Hudson to the ocean. This year, the floes have been larger and more numerous than usual, owing to the severity of the past winter. Much damage has been done to buildings and wharves along the riverfront. The shattered pier of the Knickerbocker Canoe Club is here shown. A phase of the struggle against high rents is illustrated by this houseboat, on which families have taken refuge because they were unable to pay excessive rents. This is only one of many similar houseboats lined up along the shore of the Chicago River. While they leave much to be desired in the way of sanitation and comfort, they are at least temporary shelters pending the return of the housing problem to normal conditions. In Chicago, the rents have increased in some cases 50 to 150%. Japan, although one of the latest to enter the family of modern nations, is by no means content simply to imitate the ways of other peoples. She seeks to improve upon them, and in some cases takes the initiative. One instance of this is shown in the splash fenders with which automobiles are equipped to prevent the mud from the wheels being spattered upon pedestrians. The light brush does not retard the speed of the car, but it catches the greater part of the mud and water. Georges Carpentier, the French boxer, and his bride, photographed on their arrival in New York. The Frenchman, who in a few seconds knocked out Beckett, the English fighter, is of a much higher type than most champions of the ring. He enjoys popular approbation because of the part he played for his country during the war. A match with Dempsey, the American champion, is contemplated, but has not yet been arranged. The knockout blow with which Carpentier blighted the aspirations of Beckett, the English boxer. Possibly the most unique restaurant in New York is the one pictured here, located on East 34th Street. It was formerly a stable that once housed noted racers. The stalls that once held Hermes, Irish Lad, and Gold Heels have been thoroughly renovated and hold tables for dinners. White rubber coats have been served out to the police of Montreal. Apart from their value as protection from rain, they help to mark out the location of the men on a dark night. Lady Patricia Ramsay, better known as Princess Pat, and her firstborn son, now 3 months old. She was married to Captain Ramsay February 27, 1919, and was the first royal lady for many years to renounce her rank to marry a commoner. Touring car used as a traveling home, one of many that can now be seen on German roads. The absence of adequate hotel accommodation and the wretched condition of the German railway service have made these cars popular with businessmen. They have hot and cold water, all necessities, and many luxuries. Speed kings of sea and air are here shown racing over the same course at Miami, Florida. The boat is the Gar Jr., which won the 20-mile race for express cruisers, setting a world record. The seaplane is the Aero Limited No. 4, winning a race from E.B. Thomas's triplane. The gyrocopter, the new Berliner machine that, when tilted forward, will fly horizontally. The lifting propellers are 13 feet in diameter. The system applied to an airplane enables it to ascend or descend almost vertically. ODA aeroplane engine starter. Many fatal accidents occurred during the war to mechanics while swinging the propellers of planes. This mechanical starter, worked by a cylinder of carbonic acid gas, obviates such dangers. This engine starter, invented by B.C. Hucks, is a V-shaped tripod attached to a Ford car. The car can be run up to the aeroplane to be started, and the flange on the starting device attached to the boss of the propeller. The engine is thrown into gear, the propeller is pulled over, and the motor commences to fire. President Wilson before and after his recent illness. Photographs taken of the president while on an automobile ride in Washington, March 21st. Comparison of these pictures, taken at various angles, with the one taken before he was stricken, shows the ravages wrought by illness. The Cap coup d'etat was short-lived, but it left in its wake a train of serious disorders. Outbreaks have occurred in various parts of Germany, accompanied by great loss of life and damage to property. They have been most severe in the Ruhr district, where some of the greatest German industrial plants are located. The Spartacans, who are reported to be in great force, are said to be officered by leaders of the old regime and to be amply supplied with artillery. They have won in the initial fighting, and German government troops have been called out to suppress them. This move developed a peculiar situation, as by the terms of the treaty, German troops are not permitted in that region. German officers have appealed to the Allied military authorities to permit them to operate until the disorders are repressed, when they promise to withdraw. France looks askance at the proposal, while England is reported as favoring it. Photo caption: Great Leipzig Fair in full swing. This year it has been virtually destroyed by Spartacan attacks, attended with many fatalities. American visitors were rescued by special train. Map of the Ruhr Industrial District, where Spartacan attacks have required intervention of German government troops. Members of Company B, Texas Rangers, crossing the Rio Grande to call upon Mexican fiscales, or border police, with whom they are now working in harmony to prevent liquor smuggling. Captain Stevens of the Texas Rangers and one of his men entering a Mexican dwelling where it is suspected that plans are being hatched for smuggling liquor over the Rio Grande from Mexico to the United States. Since the passage of the Prohibition law in this country, a vast amount of illicit traffic in liquor has been going on at the Mexican border. The line is guarded by Texas Rangers for the United States and by the fiscales on the Mexican side. Formerly, there was little love lost between the two forces, but now they are working well together. Leaders of the Texas Rangers and Mexican fiscales conferring on the best plans to be adopted in preventing liquor from being smuggled over the Rio Grande into United States territory. Frederick McMonnies, the noted American sculptor, at work on the Statue of Liberty, which it is proposed to give to France as the offering of the people of America. The statue is of heroic size, and its site will be at Meaux, France, the furthest point of the German advance in 1914. The statue represents liberty battling against her enemies. Mr. McMonnies thus describes his conception. It will be as though the figure of liberty had been desecrated and attacked, as though the enemies of civilization had tried to drag her down where she stands, even in her agony still resisting. Liberty protesting against invasion, liberty triumphant at last. House of David Band, doing their part in the raising of funds for the McMonnies statue. Memorial exercises at Lafayette Statue in Union Square, New York, opening campaign for America's gift to France. An automobile with gigantic pennies for its sides at Times Square, New York, in the Liberty Statue Drive. The USS Battleship Maryland, America's newest, largest, and most powerful super dreadnought, was launched March 20th at the plant of the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. The sponsor of the giant fighting craft was Mrs. E. Brooke Lee, wife of the Comptroller General of Maryland. The boilers are fitted for burning fuel oil exclusively. The main propelling machinery, which is electric, as in the case of all the capital ships now under construction for the US Navy, consists of 2 main generators driving 4 propelling motors. The main generators are of the turbine type. The Maryland, together with its sister ships, will be equipped with a high-power radio installation. The Maryland is the first battleship to carry 16-inch guns. The USS Tennessee, which will shortly be placed in commission, is practically the same size, but carries 12 14-inch guns instead of the 8 16-inch guns which will be mounted by the Maryland. 190 of these powerful guns are to be manufactured, and their combined energy will be approximately 21,250,000 pounds. The projectile for these guns weighs 2,100 pounds, and the entire number will be capable of firing nearly 200 tons of projectiles at a time. To produce this result, 125,000 pounds of powder would be burned in about 1/20th of a second. A single discharge of these combined batteries, it is estimated, would produce energy equal to that required to lift a battleship to the height of the Washington Monument. The overall length of the Maryland is 600 feet, and the beam is 97 feet. While the Tennessee has 28,500 HP, the Maryland will have 28,900 HP, and is expected to develop a speed of 21 knots. She will be electrically driven. Her crew will consist of 52 officers and 1,350 enlisted men. Photo caption: drawing of the Maryland as she will look when finished and ready for service. The prominence of her powerful armament is heightened by contrast with the unusually small superstructure. An airman's view of the Maryland immediately after the launching, giving a graphic idea of the amount of work that remains to be done before the sea fighter is completed. The Maryland on the ways at Newport News, Virginia, sliding down the greased incline to the water in a launching that was devoid of any untoward features. The great ship made a majestic picture. One of the propeller motors as installed in the Maryland. Control levers and instruments, portside propulsion control equipment of the Maryland. It is the same system as used on the California, which was recently launched. The moment at which the bottle of champagne broke against the bows. Mrs. E. Brooke Lee, wife of the state controller, was the sponsor. How one of the big propeller motors will look when installed in the Maryland. Electricity is used as the driving power and in the operation of all the equipment of the ship. Latest American submarine of the S-type being moved across the yards at Quincy, Massachusetts, preparatory to launching. A special cradle and ways were prepared for the great underwater boat. She was carried 200 feet in 10 minutes. Bow view of the submarine as she was going down the ways. The ship is said to be the most powerful ever built, far outdistancing anything of its type carrying a foreign flag. Towering Woolworth Building, Broadway, New York, tallest business building in the world. It has 57 stories and is 750 feet high. In front of it is the City Hall. Photographed from archway of municipal building. The majestic Capitol building at Washington, one of the noblest architectural creations in the world, as seen from the west. In front is the beautiful botanical gardens. View of Washington looking toward the northeast. The body of water is the tidal basin, and the building in the right foreground is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. U.S. Surgeon General Cummings with assistants weighing health crusade children at Washington, in the movement now in full swing to assure stronger and healthier bodies for the coming generation. Thrilling moment in a baseball game at Columbus, Georgia, between the Boston Braves of the National League and the Detroit Tigers of the American League. Hank Gowdy of the Bostons is reaching out to put the ball on a Detroit player who overslid the plate and was out. Bush, the shortstop of the Tigers, is shown with one hand in the air at the right. Umpire Finneran is seen deciding the play at the left. Ingenious advertising is not confined to printed pages, as is shown by this clever contrivance, which gives passersby a convenient place to sharpen pocket knives, and at the same time advertises the owner's shop. The sharpening stone is built into the concrete beneath the window, and can be used by the housewives of the vicinity to sharpen their kitchen utensils, so that the men are not the only beneficiaries. Wireless telephone outfit in the room of the House Committee on Military Affairs that connects committee with the War Department. The revolt of the Baltic troops in the environs of Berlin, while it created a sensation in Germany and throughout the world, was of short duration. It was apparent within 24 hours after its inception that it was doomed to failure. It was premature, having been hastened by the preparations of the Ebert government to arrest the ringleaders in the movement. In 5 days, the revolt had collapsed. The leaders fled and have not yet been apprehended, although their punishment is promised. The Ebert government is once more in power, and the disorders in the Ruhr district have been suppressed by the use of armed forces. Photo caption: truckloads of barbed wire being rushed to strategic points in Berlin by Ebert government. Royalist soldiers in Munich who were in sympathy with the Cap revolt are here seen searching an automobile on the Isar Bridge. The movement in Munich was short-lived and collapsed with startling suddenness. In the suburbs of Berlin, there were clashes between the Baltic troops who supported the Cap revolt and the government forces. Troops of the Ebert forces are forming an impromptu barricade in Frankfurter Alley. Field kitchens and supply columns for the invading Cap forces, showing the old imperial flag, halting in the Wilhelmstrasse on the morning of the revolution. Unter den Linden, Berlin, Brandenburg Gate in background. Here, the invading Baltic troops first stopped and established strong defensive positions, supported by artillery. It was here that Berliners were first apprised that a counter-revolution was in progress. Soldiers of the Reichswehr drawn up at the town hall in Berlin. It is upon these forces that the Ebert government relies for the suppression of disorders in the Ruhr district. The Millennium Monument in Budapest, which suffered from the vandalism of the Red terrorist attacks under the communist regime of Bela Kun. The monument, which was most impressive, had been erected to commemorate 1,000 years of Hungarian history. In the spaces between the columns stood statues of Hungarian kings. Those of the later kings were overthrown and destroyed by the communists, and the pedestals on which they formerly stood can be seen in the picture. Bela Kun is now a fugitive in Austria, and demands for his extradition have been refused. Group of the new White Army that has been recruited by the reactionary elements that have now gained control in Hungary after the brief rule of the communists under Bela Kun. The army is recruited exclusively from the illiterate peasant class, which is supposed to be least affected by Bolshevism. They wear German helmets, on which is painted the Hungarian crown. Hungarian White Army being reviewed by Admiral Horthy and his officers, who belong to the titled and Junker class. Horthy, marked by cross, was chosen March 1st as protector of Hungary. He is strongly imbued with monarchical tendencies. British troops leaving a suspected Sinn Féin headquarters after a 15-hour search for seditious leaders and literature. It will be noted that the men are in full equipment and ready for instant service. The situation in Ireland, instead of abating, is daily growing more serious. One of the women arrested in a recent raid on the Sinn Féin, trying to argue with the policeman. Some of the women involved in the movement are more vehement and ardent than their masculine colleagues. Part of the devastated area at Melrose Park, a suburb of Chicago, where 40 square blocks were destroyed by a tornado and many lives lost. Seen at Elgin, Illinois after the cyclone had passed. The building whose wreck is here seen was formerly a 4-story department store. 8 people were killed, over 100 injured, worshippers and churches were crushed, and property damage wrought to the amount of $4 million. A home near Chicago wrecked by the cyclone, type of hundreds of others that went down in the terrific storm that swept through several western and southern states on March 28th. At last account, nearly 200 lives were lost, and the stunned inhabitants have not yet been able to estimate the enormous property damage. Wreck of the First Congregational Church at Elgin, New York, that contained 1,000 worshippers at the time the crash came. The pastor had just concluded his sermon with the words, "Be prepared, for you know not when you will be called," and was pronouncing the benediction, when with a roar the roof collapsed, killing 3 persons and burying a great many others in the debris. Brick buildings as well as frame were powerless to withstand the force of the tornado that swept through the western states, as can be seen from this wrecked store at Elgin, Illinois. One of the homes at Dunning, Illinois after the storm had wreaked its fury on it. The walls were torn away like so much paper, revealing the furniture in the various rooms. The twisting cyclone practiced strange freaks as it tore its way through the suburbs of Chicago. This house at 20th Street and Hamlin Avenue was decapitated, the roof being blown into an adjacent lot. The rapid spread of aviation in this country has led enterprising hotel managers to advertise the name of their hostelries on the roof so as to attract business from the flyers. This hotel is in San Francisco. One of the most powerful battleships in the world in course of construction is the North Carolina, which when completed will be the pride of the US Navy. She will have a tonnage of 43,200 with 12 16.5 guns and subsidiary batteries. She is being built at the Norfolk Navy Yard. Sea sled of 1,600 horsepower with a speed of 55 miles an hour. These boats are used for carrying land airplanes to sea, the speed being so great that the airplanes can take off without a run. Review of the 63rd Infantry Regiment, USA, the military unit that has been chosen to guard the national capital. The review is taking place in the space before the majestic building. The choice of a regiment for this purpose is regarded as a signal honor to the unit chosen. Part of the estate on the Massachusetts coast where President Wilson will spend the summer. Allied troops parading in Jerusalem during the victory celebration. The march was participated in by both British and French troops, and the population turned out en masse to watch and in many cases to applaud. The Turkish spectators naturally found little to please them in the spectacle, but for the mass of the throng it was a symbol of national deliverance. Men and women in a German factory salvaging leather from old army shoes, leather cases, and articles of all kinds, in order that the work may help in relieving the great shortage of leather in Germany. When the war came to an end with unexpected suddenness, there was an enormous amount of leather goods, boots, straps, belts, etc. that had been manufactured for army use that was no longer required. Some had been only partly used, and the material was in sufficiently good condition to justify saving it and transforming it to other uses. An event attended with many elements of mystery occurred recently when, upon unloading the U.S. shipping board freighter West Hepburn at San Francisco, it was found that $75,000 worth of cottonseed oil and peanut oil that had been put on the boat at Kobe, Japan, had been destroyed. Out of a total of 14,800 cases of oil, 5,000 cases had been crushed and punctured by stevedores' bale hooks. It is thought to be a case of sabotage. Damaged cases are here seen. Mademoiselle Lucille Bataille, Queen of Queens of the Carnival at Paris, leaving the Élysée Palace, the French White House, after she had been received and congratulated by Paul Deschanel, President of the Republic. One of the floats that attracted marked attention in the Paris Carnival. It represented French resources in food and drink, and besides specimens of French products, was elaborately garlanded with flowers and adorned with a bevy of beautiful girls chosen for charm and vivacity. One of the grotesque features of the carnival was a float that parodied the great French railway strike that had just ended in a pronounced victory for the government. Various makeshifts such as bicycles and carts were shown as substitutes for railway carriages, and the float was drawn by horses on which postilions were seated, while clowns on the float itself diverted the throngs by their antics and contortions. The shortage in housing and the growth in population have sent the figures for rent to dizzy heights. That part of this increase is justified by increased taxes and heavier costs in repairing and maintaining the buildings is generally acknowledged. But public indignation has been aroused by the greed of many landlords who believe in putting on all that the traffic will bear. In many cases, rents have doubled, sometimes trebled, and the situation has become so acute that bills have been prepared in the New York legislature which declare that a public emergency exists that impairs the freedom of contract, and that therefore the increase of rent shall be limited to 20 or 25%. Any further increase throws the burden of proof on the landlords to show before a court that the increase is justified and reasonable. There is every prospect that the bills will be passed and immediately become law. In the meantime, heart-rending scenes of eviction are becoming common, tenants are threatening direct action, and the situation is undeniably serious. Photo caption: Rent strike in Douglas Street, East New York. The furniture of the tenants who have been evicted has been covered to protect it from the weather. Rent strikers gathered on sidewalk before a tall tenement row placarded with strike notices. One of the pathetic scenes that are all too common in the present desperate stage of the housing and renting problem. The aged woman in the cold street is keeping watch over her pitiful belongings that have been thrown out of her former home. Furniture of an evicted tenant thrown into the street because the owner was unable to meet the exorbitant increase in rent. In some cases, this increase has amounted to 100%. Tenants in the same building have gone on strike, on the theory perhaps that there is strength in numbers, that benevolent magistrates may help them curb the landlord, or that there will not be enough marshals to evict them. Famous old Bootme tree in Jerusalem, which was uprooted and thrown down in the recent blizzard that swept the city. The tree, which is of unknown age, was one of the landmarks of the place, and in pre-war days had been used by the Turks as a gallows. A tradition ran that when the tree should fall, it would mark the end of Turkish domination, and in order to avert this fate, the Turkish authorities had the tree propped with poles and bound with iron. It has fallen, however, and so has Turkish rule. The Mosque of Omar, one of the chief Mohammedan structures of Jerusalem, surrounded with snow to an extent that has probably not been equaled in centuries. Narrow snow-covered street in Jerusalem leading to the Mosque of Omar. The houses at the left have latticed windows, through which the Muslim women used to peep unobserved in the days when the Turkish yoke still lay heavy on Palestine. The wailing place of the Jews in Jerusalem, with British soldiers more than knee-deep in snow. It is a most unusual thing to have snow in the Holy City, but on February 9th, snow began to fall and continued for 3 days and nights without cessation. Many buildings collapsed, train service was paralyzed, and in the surrounding country, sheep and cattle perished by thousands. Applicants for American citizenship receiving their final citizenship papers at the Bureau of Naturalization in New York City. All types of foreigners are represented from the various countries whose human output is sent here to the great melting pot of the nations. The second or third generation of these newly made citizens will have completely assimilated into the great American family. Swearing in an applicant for American citizenship at the New York Bureau of Naturalization during the application for second or final papers. Each applicant has to be accompanied by 2 witnesses, who are also sworn. As can be seen, the clerks are kept busy in attending to those who are thus inducted into American citizenship. The applicants are required to renounce all previous national ties and to swear loyalty only to America. Automobiles employed in drawing tramcars in Apeldoorn, Holland. Formerly, the cars were drawn by horses, and progress was so slow and unreliable that many of the citizens preferred to walk. Since the installation of the new system, however, the cars are well filled during business hours. Reindeer raising is a new industry in Alaska, but already the little herd of these animals that the US imported from Asia some years ago has multiplied so greatly that 4 packing plants will be built this year to ship reindeer meat to the States. Part of the herd is shown. Novel team of camels being used by a farmer near Macon, Georgia to draw his loads. The animals were the property of a circus wintering at Macon. Wives of cabinet members and other officials doing their own marketing in Washington to help reduce the cost of living. President Carranza, central figure of First Row, in conference with governors of Mexican provinces, who recently met with him to make plans for the forthcoming Mexican elections in July. Early and charming harbinger of spring in Washington. Spring is ushered in annually at Washington by the blossoming of the Japanese cherry trees which Mrs. Taft, wife of the ex-president, originally brought to the national capital. They are planted about the tidal basin and present a picture of exquisite beauty. The Arlington Amphitheater at Washington that is now nearly completed. The structure, which has a noble architectural effect, is designed as a place for ceremonies and celebrations in honor of the nation's illustrious dead who lie in the beautiful cemetery at Arlington. It forms one of the most striking features of that famous City of the Dead. Close-up view of the Arlington Amphitheater. It is built on an eminence overlooking the Potomac River near Washington. It cost nearly $1 million to build and has been in process of construction for 5 years. Girls in Scotch dress and Easter parade on Fifth Avenue, New York. The parade has become an annual feature in the metropolis, and although the weather was inclement, the avenue was crowded. The girls above attracted marked attention. In these days of race suicide, when economists and statesmen are deploring the falling birth rate and looking about for a remedy, the woman who can boast of having 13 children is a rarity. Still more unusual does the case become when 10 of the 13 children are employed in moving pictures. Mrs. Jane Trebole is the happy mother, shown in the picture surrounded by her 7 boys and 6 girls. Their ages run from 4 to 24, from Jeanette on her mother's knee to Jean standing at the extreme right. All are hardy and vigorous. Realistic dugout made by Canadian war veterans in front of Toronto City Hall, in connection with the campaign that has been instituted by the United Veterans League for a cash bonus of $2,000. Canada has already rendered substantial aid to veterans of the war, but more is requested. A duplicate of Old Bill of Bairnsfeather's cartoons is on pile at left. The Hood, named after a famous British admiral, making a speed of 31 knots on her trial trip. She is 860 feet long, and will cost when fully ready for service $30 million. She is armed with 8 15-inch guns, with a secondary armament of 12 5.5-inch guns. She will take the place of the Queen Elizabeth as flagship of the Atlantic Squadron. Close-up view of the 14-inch guns which form the main armament of the United States Dreadnought Tennessee, now nearly completed and ready for active service. The ship was launched in May of last year, and is one of the most formidable battleships in our own or any other navy. She is an oil burner with an electric drive. Her heavy guns have an effective range of over 13 miles. The projectile that she throws weighs over half a ton. The new enclosed fighting top of the Tennessee. It is shielded with heavy armor, with apertures for the muzzles of the guns with which it is equipped. Anti-aircraft guns are mounted there. Officers of the Tennessee inspecting the muzzle of one of the 14-inch guns, of which the vessel carries 12, besides many auxiliary batteries of smaller caliber. The gunnery of the United States Navy has always been of surpassing excellence. The commissioning of the Tennessee has been postponed, but is expected soon. Storm clouds have grown more threatening over the Rhine, where the French forces, under the lead of a veteran of the war, General de Goutte, have advanced with great celerity eastward into Germany and occupied Frankfurt, Hamburg, and other important cities. The declared aim of the French government was to hasten the withdrawal of the German troops from the Ruhr district. The cities were to be held simply as a guarantee, and assurances were given that the French hold on them would be relinquished as soon as the German retirement had taken place. By the terms of the peace treaty, the Germans were forbidden to have any forces in a zone within 30 miles of the east bank of the Rhine. This provision, it is claimed by the French, has been violated by the sending of troops by the Ebert government into the forbidden territory to subdue the rioters in the district. The Germans claimed that this was necessary in the interests of law and order, but the French alleged that this is largely camouflage, and that if this violation of treaty terms is overlooked or condoned, Germany will grow bolder and seek to vitiate other vital clauses. Photo caption: Belgians on guard in one of the Rhine bridgeheads on the edge of the Ruhr district, the great industrial region of Germany, where German troops have been engaged in suppressing disorders and advancing into the demilitarized zone. Outposts of Belgian forces holding up a family of German refugees who are escaping from the disturbed German industrial section and seeking to cross over into zone of Belgian occupation. Hundreds of families thus fled in panic. Riverfront of Hamburg, one of the German towns in the Ruhr industrial district that was occupied by the French forces under General de Goutte as a guarantee that German troops would retire from the region. The picketing of the capital that was in vogue during the war by agitators for women's suffrage has been resumed recently, but this time with a view to influence American public opinion against Great Britain in her treatment of the Irish question. The banners explain their purpose. The women paraded in front of the British embassy, but there was no disorder. Whippets and larger tanks passing in review before Secretary of War Baker and Chief of Staff Peyton C. March at Camp Meade, Maryland, on the occasion of a recent field inspection. This branch of the service has attained a point of high efficiency. A large throng of good-natured Berlin citizens accompanied the detachment of the Revolutionary Baltic troops, as headed by their band and flag they marched up Unter den Linden to take up their station at the Brandenburg Gate. An echo of the revolution in Mayence. Ex-soldiers marching in large numbers through the streets in a mass parade denouncing Prussian militarism. At Mayence, the headquarters of the French Army of Occupation, precautions were taken to prevent any riotous outbreak on the part of adherents of either party. Photo shows a strong French cavalry patrol in one of the streets of that city. Revolutionary guards at the Chancellor's Palace in Berlin. The heavy equipment, which included hand grenades, is an unusual feature in a guard of this kind. Württemberg soldiers guarding the barbed wire enclosure about the Kunsthalle at Stuttgart, where the National Assembly met after Ebert's flight to that city from Berlin. President Ebert of Germany snapshotted in the streets of Stuttgart, in the period before the collapse of revolt brought him back to Berlin. Poster placarded by the revolutionists denouncing the effort of the Ebert press to make the revolt seem a monarchistic scheme. Captain Ehrhardt reviewing his brigade of Marines, the first revolutionary troops to enter Berlin. General Luttwitz, leader of the revolutionary forces in the Kapp Rebellion, reviewing his guard. It was the threatened arrest of Luttwitz by Noske, the Minister of Defense, that precipitated the revolt before the movement had fully matured. Luttwitz fled after the collapse and has not yet been arrested. Funeral of America's tallest Chinaman, held in the open street at Boston, Massachusetts. It was impossible to get his casket in or out of his house. Moi Ni Wing, the deceased, was 6 feet 6 inches high and weighed over 200 pounds. 400 Chinese Freemasons acted as escort to the body. Incense, sweetmeats, and roast pig were placed on his grave. Phonographic fire alarm which automatically connects central and fire headquarters. This ingenious contrivance of a member of the fire department gives the alarm, tells where the fire is, and keeps repeating the message for 15 minutes. An excessive amount of heat causes wires to meet fuses which form an electric connection, starts the telephone record, and lifts the receiver. John Burroughs, eminent naturalist and author, celebrating his 83rd birthday in the open air at Esopus, New York, April 3rd. He is here shown studying a pussy willow branch. Thomas A. Edison, Henry Ford, and others of his host of friends visited him on that occasion. Despite his advanced age, he is still strong and hardy, and retains all his keen interest in men and events. His first article was printed in 1860. Salvo of 12 turret guns fired from the Super Dreadnought Arizona, which holds the Navy championship in gunnery. The 5-inch gun crew, which has the credit of 9 white E's on the Arizona's secondary battery, is here shown. The coveted letter E stands for excellence. Yale Varsity 8 defeating the University of Pennsylvania in a race over the Schuylkill River course at Philadelphia, April 3rd. The riverbanks were crowded with cheering spectators. Pennsylvania got the jump at the start with a 36 beat, but Yale gradually wore down the lead and won by little more than a full length. United States Marines raising the Stars and Stripes over the fort at St. Thomas in the Virgin Island Group, West Indies, recently purchased by this country. The lure of hidden treasure has always been a fascination for the average human being, and the Marine who is here inspecting an old battered and rusted chest is no exception. Up to date, no finds have been reported. Whatever loot had once been buried in the islands has probably been removed long since, or the place of hiding has passed from human memory. Town and port of St. Thomas, the leading town of the Virgin Islands, recently purchased by the United States from Denmark. It is a coaling station and port of call. Its population is about 12,000, many being descendants from Negro slaves. British Marines from the Ramillies marching through Constantinople. The place is the Hippodrome Square. In the foreground is the Mosque of Ahmed, and in the background at the left is the world-famous Church of St. Sophia, which for nearly 600 years has been a Mohammedan mosque. The entrance of the Marines was intended to impress the Turkish government. Mustafa Kemal. This Turkish leader is fulfilling a role in Turkey somewhat similar to that of D'Annunzio and Fiume. He is the head of the Nationalists, who ignore the orders of their own government but are really resisting the Allies. Marines from a British warship in the Golden Horn coming up the St. Sophia Road. The continued massacre of Armenians forced the Allies to take the drastic action of occupying the capital and arresting certain defiant Turkish leaders. Prisoners working at the clearing of wrecked homes and buildings that went down when the tornado swept through the town of LaGrange, Georgia on March 28th. Over 160 lives were lost in the cyclone that affected both western and southern states. Planting of a memorial tree at Walter Reed Hospital, Washington, by American Legion Post No. 21 on anniversary of declaration of war against Germany. Mrs. Walter Reed, widow of the Army officer who lost his life in the tropics while seeking the cause and prevention of typhoid fever, planting a memorial tree on the Walter Reed Hospital grounds at Washington on April 6th. The tree was presented by the American Forestry Association. Train, manned by soldiers, moving Army stores, despite the tie-up in freight traffic in New York Harbor. The Army has its own tugs, floats, piers, and railways on Governor's Island. Flocks of the wealthiest Montenegrin, in a country where wealth is measured by livestock rather than money. The farm here visible remained free from depredations during the war because of its sheltered and almost inaccessible location. The high stack of fodder at left is surrounded by a thorn fence to keep the flock from grazing on it. It is reserved for winter use. Mounted Karapags, kin to the Kurds, a wild and lawless people, largely nomadic in their habits and a constant thorn in the sides of neighboring peoples. They have stirred up a great deal of trouble for the British in Kurdistan and adjacent states. Their raids on the Armenians are frequent and are always accompanied by rapine and massacre. Assyrian residents of Persia, who by a strange turn of fate are members of the Nestorian Church, an ancient Christian communion. Women of the district are here seen churning butter in sheepskins. Royal stables of the Shah of Persia, maintained in the rich district of Mazandaran. Each horse is provided with a special attendant, whose life would be in peril if he neglected his task. The horses are not exceeded in speed and beauty anywhere in the world. Seen in Tehran, capital of Persia, during Moharrain, the 10-day national mourning period. The procession is passing with the catafalque of the dead prophets. Beggars in the streets of Khorasan, Persia. At first sight, they seem to be wearing hats, but they have only their hair for covering. The hair is almost as stiff as wire, and can be shaped to suit any style in vogue. Spitsbergen glacier face, ending in a steep cliff. Formed by the precipitation of the winter snow, these great glaciers move slowly along the valleys to the sea. The marble-like markings of the ice are formed by quantities of dirt and gravel and mineral matter. The island of Spitsbergen is rich in minerals, especially coal, as is shown by these coal-bearing strata in the mountains that extend for many miles. How easily it can be utilized for commerce is shown by its nearness to deep water. There is a tremendous demand for coal in Europe, and as Spitsbergen is only 500 miles from a Norwegian port, it promises to be a great source of supply. Mining experts examining asbestos deposits at Recherche Bay, Spitsbergen. There has been a rush of prospectors to this naturally rich mineral country during the last 3 years. Lead, copper, gypsum, as well as gold and silver are found there. The resentment of the wet elements in Chicago and Milwaukee against their alleged wrongs under the Prohibition Amendment has found expression in the formation of the Order of the Camels to protect personal liberty. Unlike the camels, the members of the order cannot go long without a drink. They welcome an oasis. Wreck of the first German commercial airplane which came to this country after the war. It was utterly ruined by a fall at Roosevelt Field, Long Island. The machine was an elaborate one, constructed of duralumin, and the wingspread was 48 feet. It had a luxurious cabin and was equipped with a 135 Bayern engine. Albert Edward, Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne, center, and his two younger brothers. At left is Prince Albert Frederick, born 1895, and at right is Prince Henry William, born in 1900. The trio were photographed at Portsmouth. Prince of Wales en route to Portsmouth on his journey to New Zealand, leaning from the window of his train to acknowledge cheers of schoolboys. British battlecruiser Renown bearing the prince and his suite passing through the Panama Canal. View taken at Pedro Miguel Locks. New attraction at the summer resorts near London, England. Army tanks, some of which have seen service during the war, have been acquired by enterprising concession holders, who are expecting good business from the holiday crowds that are looking out for thrills. Naval steel tank in the backyard of a Kansas City physician, in which is a chamber in which patients are placed for treatment by compressed air. It accommodates 72 people. The claim is made that the treatment is beneficial for neuritis, heart disease, rheumatism, pneumonia, and paralysis. Babe Ruth, the mightiest batsman of them all, seen for the first time in Yankee uniform. He made 29 home runs last season. His transfer from the Red Sox to the New York Americans at a reported cost of $125,000 was the sensation of the year. The great length of his bat is noticeable. All opposing pitchers view him with profound respect. Crowded stands at the Polo Grounds April 14th, when the first game of the 1920 championship season was played between the Giants and the Boston Braves, the latter winning by 6-3. An infield fly had been raised by the batter, who is running to first, and the second baseman is preparing to take it. The right fielder is running in from his position to back up the play. Hank Gowdy, veteran catcher of the Boston National Leaguers, in position behind the plate during the game between the Giants and the Braves. He was the principal factor when the Bostons won the World Series from the Athletics. He was the first major league player who enlisted in the war. Jess Barnes, leading pitcher last year in National League, who pitched an opening game for Giants. Frank Frisch, young find of the Giants, who is expected to star at third base, succeeding Zimmerman. Brother played against brother in the opening game between Brooklyn and the Phillies. Mac Wheat, left, is shaking hands with his brother Zach. George Kelly, new first baseman of the Giants, who has the difficult task of trying to fill the shoes of Hal Chase, who is generally acknowledged to be the greatest first baseman ever in the game. Kelly is showing great promise. Umpires McCormick and Hart at the Brooklyn Phillies game, carrying the new balls on the field. No player must touch the balls till they are put in play. Eddie Ayers, Boston pitcher, whose work beat the Giants in opening game of the season at Polo Grounds. Two veterans of the game, Gabby Kravitz, manager of the Phillies, left, and Wilbert Robertson, manager of the Brooklyns, shaking hands before game. Although an element of tragedy was involved in the abortive Cap Revolt, it partook in some features of comic opera. It lasted just 5 days. The Baltic troops are here seen retiring through the same Brandenburg Gate that they had entered in triumph shortly before. Revolutionary detachment in Duisburg. The lack of uniforms and soldierly bearing is noticeable. This is a military outpost near the famous battlefield of Marasesti, where the Romanians with but 2 divisions inflicted heavy losses on 5 German divisions and saved northern Romania from invasion. The Romanian wounded were removed from the field in American Red Cross ambulances and treated by American doctors. On account of its sanguinary character, the Battle of Marasesti is known as the Gettysburg of Romania. The government plans to build a great national memorial there. Some of the 87 caskets containing the bodies of soldiers of the U.S. Air Service, who died of disease or other causes, and were originally buried in England. They are here ranged on a pier in Hoboken, after having been brought over by the transport Nansemond. Funeral procession of the Lord Mayor of Cork, passing along Camden Quay in that city. Great throngs crowded the streets, the hearse was covered with flowers, and there were manifestations of public sorrow. Sandwich men parading before the House of Commons while the Home Rule Bill was being discussed, carrying placards which represented the protests of Ulsterites and Unionists against the measure. The placards are violently anti-Sinn Féin in sentiment. Anti-Zionist demonstrations in Jerusalem, March 8th. Mobs of Arabs, resentful against the Jewish dominance in Jerusalem, are here seen listening to impassioned harangues by nationalist agitators. Between 7,000 and 8,000 Arabs, Turks, and Christians parading the streets of the Holy City as a demonstration against the proposal that Palestine be handed over to the Jews. Unique and historic protest by Arabs, Muslims, and Christians against Jewish rule over Palestine. Flags were waved bearing the inscriptions, "We ask for justice. We oppose Zionist immigration. Our land is for us. May he not live who betrays the fatherland." Petitions were presented to American, French, Spanish, and Italian consuls and the British military governor against the Zionist movement, and these officials promised to present them to their respective governments. Chicago stockyards put temporarily out of business because of the inability of the railroads to bring in stock. 40,000 men were thrown out of work. Passenger trains standing deserted in the Erie Railroad yards in Jersey City following the strike. Freight piled up at the West Shore Railroad Station in Weehawken, New Jersey. The scene is typical of scores of similar ones along the New York and New Jersey waterfronts, where the sudden desertion of work by strikers has tied up transportation. Oxford-Cambridge boat race of 1920 on the Thames, showing the crews as they were approaching Hammersmith Bridge. At that point, Cambridge was leading by half a length. This advantage was gradually increased until when the finish line was crossed, Cambridge was 4 lengths ahead. The betting favored Cambridge. The race was witnessed by enormous crowds that lined the riverbank along the course. Crowd at the Middlesex end of Hammersmith Bridge while the Oxford-Cambridge race was in progress. Every point of vantage was occupied, as can be seen by the human swarms on trees and balconies. Barge loads of spectators on the Middlesex shore and in strings of barges. No sporting event in England, except the Derby, causes such an outpouring. The race is the first that has been rowed between the rival universities since the end of the war. American Canoe Association holding their annual cruise on the Ramapo River in Rockland County, New York. One of the canoes is here seen shooting the rapids, which demands unusual care and skill to avoid an upset. There are plenty of fallen trees and snags, as well as rocks in the stream, and the danger lends an exciting element to the cruise. Members of Harvard's track team using full-length mirrors in training. This plan has been initiated by their coach, Whelan, who has found it a valuable aid in emphasizing his instructions. The men can study their own leg action as they run, and can detect and correct defects. One of the dangers ever present in steeplechasing is illustrated by this picture of a crash at Sandown Park in England, when Derryboy falls and sober Luke throws his rider. The riders were in imminent peril, but escaped without serious injury. The hazards on English courses are difficult, and the sport is thrilling. Railroads are slower than reindeers in North Russia, where the railroad system has disintegrated. American Red Cross supplies are transported with Santa Claus's favorite steeds. Reindeers are able to make 9 miles an hour and keep it at 9 hours a day. The railroads do well if they average 6 miles an hour. Here is shown a convoy of empty sledges returning to Red Cross warehouses. The American officers in the party are holding a parley with an Eskimo. United States Blue Jackets dismantling one of the German submarines allotted to the United States by the peace treaty. Some idea of the complicated mechanism of these underwater terrors can be gained from the picture. Former German warship Nassau, which will come to the United States as a prize of war. Examination of the ships surrendered by the Germans under the terms of the peace treaty has shown that they are already antiquated and could with difficulty be used in present-day navies. The Nassau may be utilized for target practice. Launching of a big Cunarder for transatlantic service. She is named the Scythia and is here shown taking the water at Barrow, England. The vessel is 625 feet long, 75 feet wide, and is of 27,000 tons. She will burn oil exclusively, and is the first of her kind to be built for the Cunard Line. There has been a great development recently in British shipbuilding, and the losses occasioned by the war are being rapidly made up. West Point cadets going through their evolutions on the south field of Columbia University, April 11, 1920. The occasion was the annual visit of the Military Academy Choir to the university. Before services were held in the chapel, drill took place in the presence of a large throng of spectators, who applauded the faultless marching of the future officers. The High Cost of Living Division of the Department of Justice is helping housekeepers in the selection of cheap and nutritious cuts of meat. The chef of a large Washington hotel is giving a demonstration. Pioneers in the use of overalls designed to frighten profiteers and reduce the cost of clothing. These men are city officials of Birmingham, Alabama, where the movement started. At first treated as a joke, the new idea is assuming large proportions. The overall movement is not confined wholly to men, as some women also, as shown above, are similarly clad. W.D. Upshaw, representative from Georgia, who recently startled the House by appearing at a session clad in overalls. He made a short speech on the subject, and expects that many congressmen will follow his example. Members of the Cheese Club, composed largely of publicity men, parading in overalls on 46th Street, New York City. The members of the club have pledged themselves to persist in the movement. King George of England mixing in a most democratic way with a throng of football enthusiasts after a game at Manchester. The crowd cheered him and sang "He's a jolly good fellow" as he passed through. Joe Stetcher, Wright, and Ed Strangler Lewis shaking hands just before their great wrestling match in the 71st Regiment Armory, New York. The match was one of the best ever contested. It lasted 3 hours, 4 minutes, and 15 seconds before Stetcher took off a headlock and with a body hold and wrist lock pinned Lewis's shoulders to the mat, thus retaining his championship. Motorcycle hill climbing contest at Mine Hill, Dover, New Jersey. It was a 500-foot course with a 50% grade, and was won by cyclist Fritz. Only 2 machines reached top. McKinney of Patterson is here shown hitting a rock and bounding in air. The Lincolnshire is one of the big events of the English turf season. At its running on March 24th, Furious won, with Scatwell and Monteith following in order. The horses are here seen at the finish. The winner was at odds of 33 to 1. Disorders in Ireland still continue, and not a week passes without being marked by some attack on police barracks or the murder of some member of the constabulary. The British government made a sudden change of front in the matter of the political prisoners who had gone on a hunger strike, and some of whom were very near death. 66 strikers were released on parole, for a period differing in each case according to its particular nature. Lord French stated that some of these had been released by an error, as it was not intended that the act of clemency should be extended to any except those who were awaiting trial. Photo caption: Easter Sunday scene in Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin, Ireland. Woman putting a Celtic cross with a Gaelic inscription on the grave of Robert Coleman, who died while a prisoner. Sentry removing a barbed wire barricade in an Irish city to allow a car to pass after the occupants had been searched. This occurred in the period of apprehension of Irish outbreaks just prior to Easter Sunday. It had been feared that revolt might break out on that day, as it had 4 years before, when hundreds were killed and the leader executed. There were sporadic attacks on barracks, but no widespread uprising. Cart being searched for arms and hand grenades in one of the streets of Dublin. The British held that this was necessary because of the fact that murders were frequent and that large quantities of arms were finding their way into the hands of the Sinn Féiners. Arrests still continued to be made in large numbers. On April 15th, a raid was carried out that resulted in the arrest of over 100. Only 5 of these were ultimately detained. Armed soldiers guarding the entrance to Dublin Castle on Easter Monday. The entrance was heavily sandbagged, as it was here that the first shot of the Easter Rebellion of 1916 was fired, and it was feared that a similar attempt might be made this year. Nothing of the kind occurred, however, and the day passed in comparative quiet. A comparatively new phase of the Irish Troubles was developed when the Income Tax Collector's Office in Dublin was burned in a raid of masked men. Valuable records and papers were destroyed, and in the picture is seen some of the litter that was left after the raiders did their work. Members of the military police searching country travelers in Ireland. The lines have been tightened all over the island, and investigation of anything, however seemingly simple and innocent, that may be conveying arms or seditious literature is carried on with diligence. The cars of the well-to-do in Ireland are subjected to the same searching scrutiny as the carts of the peasantry. Soldiers are here seen lifting the hood of the auto to see if anything contraband is being carried. If so, it would be confiscated, and the occupants of the car would be called upon to explain the case to the authorities. St. George's Episcopal Church in Stuyvesant Square, New York, where a shocking murder was committed on Sunday, April 18th. The church is one of the landmarks of the city and has a large congregation of prominent business and professional men. Dr. James W. Marco, celebrated surgeon, who was shot and almost instantly killed by a maniac while passing the collection plate in St. George's Church. The murderer was pursued and captured. Disastrous cargo boat fire in Brooklyn, as pictured from an airplane. A half hour after the fire had started, an airplane had raced all the way from Keyport, New Jersey, and was snapping photographs of the flames. The sky for miles was blackened by the smoke. Ammonia, nitrates, and other combustibles exploded. Funeral procession of the late ex-president of China, held in Peking, China, February 2nd, 1920. The bier of Feng Kuo Chang is prominent in the left foreground. The crowds were so enormous that the Chinese policemen seen in the picture had hard work to keep order. General John J. Pershing inspecting troops at Fort J, Governor's Island, New York, April 16, 1920. He took luncheon with Lieutenant General Bullard, the department commander, and then inspected members of the 22nd Infantry and Guard companies stationed at the island. He stopped to talk with several soldiers wearing service stripes. 1,200 soldiers of the Polish-American Legion arriving in New York April 18th on the SS Antigone. They have been fighting the Bolsheviks since 1917. The troops were originally recruited from all parts of the United States. French flag flying in the square before the Opera House at Frankfurt. The latter city is the most important of the many on the right bank of the Rhine that have been taken possession of by the French as a protest against the violation of the treaty terms by Germany in sending troops into the Ruhr district. One of the leading terms of the treaty was that a space about 30 miles wide on the right bank of the Rhine should be demilitarized. This provision was violated by the entry of German troops, and the French action followed in consequence. General de Metz, in immediate charge of the French troops at Frankfurt, standing on a balcony commanding a view of one of the principal squares of the city. The occupation of the city was carried out with surprising celerity on April 6th. The troops started a half hour after midnight, and by dawn the French flag was flying over Frankfurt and Darmstadt. 4 hours later, Homburg, Hanau, Dieburg, and the adjacent territory was occupied. The inhabitants were amazed, but there was no opposition, and before the day was over, the French were firmly established. French soldiers, assisted by civilian volunteers, regulating traffic and keeping crowds from assembling. The first thing the French did on occupying Frankfurt was to take in custody the members of the local police, who it was thought might obstruct the work of the French administration. Later on, the services of some citizens were utilized. Apart from a regrettable demonstration by students, there has been little disorder. That the terms of the armistice have not wholly deprived the Germans of heavy artillery is shown by this picture of Ebert troops with a train of armored cars guarding the suburbs of Berlin against attack during the period when the Kapp troops held the main city. A new kind of traffic policeman in Berlin streets that it is to be hoped will not become popular in other capitals. A soldier is stationed with a machine gun in an improvised trench in a street in the northern section of the city. The scene occurred at the time that a rebel uprising was threatened, and represented a precautionary measure on the part of the authorities. Detachment of the French occupying troops passing through one of the main avenues of Darmstadt, one of the German cities that, in conjunction with Frankfurt, was taken possession of by the French on April 6th. How long the occupation will last is conjectural. The French government has announced that the troops will be withdrawn as soon as the German forces have been recalled from the Ruhr district. Headquarters of the French occupying forces at the Hotel Imperial at Frankfurt. The city is now submissive to the new regime. Bloodshed occurred shortly after the occupation, owing to a demonstration chiefly due to students that took place when a rumor spread that the French had been recalled. Jeers and threats provoked a volley that resulted in the death and wounding of several Germans. Solemn presentation of banners to the famous Italian brigade, Cuneo, which by its deeds of valor on the Carso won the name of the Ever Faithful. The ceremony took place at Milan and was an occasion of note. General Badoglio, chief of the general staff, and other distinguished generals are here seen reviewing the brigade. Decorated monument of Victor Emmanuel II at Milan, Italy, surrounded by an enormous crowd at the celebration of the 100th anniversary of his birth. Group of Chinese children attending the public schools of San Francisco. Apart from the facial characteristics, they might be mistaken for those of any other nationality. Their parents represent all types, from the immigrant coolie from Canton to the suave and accomplished merchant from Shanghai or Hong Kong who has his business establishment in America. The children are said to be apt students and eager for learning. In China itself, the scholar is honored and ranks high in popular esteem. This placard was found in a chop suey place in Chinatown, San Francisco, and expresses the celestial view of Prohibition. The spelling and syntax are open to criticism, but the screed is not devoid of Oriental attempts at humor. Interesting little ones of Chinese parents residing in San Francisco. Whatever feeling the people of the coast have for social or economic reasons against the Chinese immigrants, no further danger is to be apprehended from their offspring, who are being subjected to American influence and being taught in American public schools. There are no obstacles placed in the way of their education here, and the schools in which they are taught have excellent staff of teachers and all modern educational appliances. Leaders of outlaw railroad strike arrested in Chicago. Deputy U.S. Marshal C.C. Smith is reading the warrants issued for the arrest of H.E. Reading, chairman of the United Engineers Association, Center, and John Grunow, Right, organizer of Yardmen's strike. Royal Maundy money being arranged and made ready for distribution to the poor in Westminster Abbey, London. The name is given to small silver coins specially struck for the purpose, that are given to recipients from London parishes on Maundy Thursday, just preceding Easter. The custom is a very ancient one. The money is supposed to be the gift of the sovereign. Concrete houses made after a plan that originated with Thomas A. Edison, erected in a New Jersey town. Each is made for a single family, and it is said that 3,000 will shortly be erected in Brooklyn. Making one of the concrete monolithic houses. The material is poured into a form that can be used many times and left to harden. Close view of one of the completed concrete houses. The plans call for 6 rooms and bath. They are claimed to be cooler in summer and warmer in winter than houses built of other material. They are detached and stand on plots 25 by 100. Interior of part of room in concrete house. The houses contain a modern laundry with washing machine and modern heating plant. Plumbing and fixtures are of highest grade. Mixing the concrete used in the construction of the houses. The houses are manufactured rather than built. They are fireproof in construction and can be made with great rapidity. Houses with 6 rooms and bath are sold for $5,500 each. Representative Champ Clark of Missouri speaking in the House of Representatives, over which at one time he presided. He is discussing the Porter Peace Resolution and maintaining that Congress had no authority to pass it, as the concluding of peace was the prerogative of the president. The resolution was adopted by 242 to 150. Members of the Wilson cabinet leaving the White House after having had a conference with President Wilson, the first cabinet meeting that had been held for a long time. The president himself presided, and the chief subjects discussed were the outlaw strike and the differences between the Department of Justice and Department of Labor. Beautiful yacht Electra, the property of Guglielmo Marconi, the famous wireless inventor, leaving the harbor of Southampton, England. Marconi has lately come into the news in connection with the possibility of the Earth being brought into communication with Mars. He asserted that there had recently been disturbances at wireless stations that were unprecedented and could not be accounted for on any principle known to wireless photography. It was conjectured that the inhabitants of Mars might be making efforts to get in touch with us. Mountjoy Prison in Dublin, Ireland, in which have been imprisoned many of the Sinn Féiners who have been arrested for political offenses. A hunger strike was started by about 100 of these, and was carried so far that many were on the point of exhaustion and possible death. The demand for their release has been fierce and insistent. Sinn Féiner arrested in Dublin for defying British authority being conducted to jail under guard. Arrests are still plentiful in the disturbed Irish capital. A recent raid in a single night netted over 100 prisoners. All but 5 of these were released within 24 hours. The replacement of Lord French and Ian Macpherson recently was thought to foreshadow a more stringent application of laws against sedition. But one of the first acts of the new administration was the release of nearly 100 Irish political prisoners who had gone on a hunger strike. Girls in Dublin carrying banners asking the populace to pray for Ireland's prisoners. The demonstration was made in the immediate vicinity of Mountjoy Prison, where 104 political prisoners were said to be dying following a prolonged hunger strike. The popular feeling ran so high and the attitude of crowds became so threatening that nearly 100 of the prisoners were released by the British authorities. Some were sent to hospitals and others to their homes. The release was on parole. Mob of Irish residents of Dublin outside Mountjoy Prison cheering the 104 hunger strikers who were there confined. The subsequent release of these came very unexpectedly. The Irish press hailed it as an act of belated justice. The intention had been to release only those awaiting trial, but some were freed by error who had been convicted. Lord Mayor of Dublin addressing great throng of Irishmen and pleading with them to keep the peace and prevent bloodshed. In foreground are British soldiers ready for emergencies. Monster tank ready to repress disorders outside of Mountjoy Prison, Dublin, Ireland, where relatives of and sympathizers with the imprisoned hunger strikers are holding vigil and saying prayers. 16-cylinder Duesenberg machine in which Tommy Milton broke all records for 1 and 2 miles at Daytona, Florida. On April 28th, he made a mile in 23.07 seconds, and the 2 miles in 46.24 seconds. Close-up view of the machinery of the powerful Duesenberg 16-cylinder car, in which Milton broke records for 1 and 2 miles. Flames were bursting from beneath the hood when the finish line was reached, and Milton drove his machine into the ocean to extinguish them. Eugene Walker and the motorcycle with which he broke world's records at Daytona Beach, Florida, making 116.06 miles an hour. One of the most disquieting and singular episodes in the radical strike propaganda in this country was the permission given to Alexander Howitt, a prisoner for contempt of court, to address a crowd of striking miners from the jail balcony. Crowd at Girard, Kansas, listening to an address from the jail balcony of Alexander Howitt, the imprisoned radical strike leader, in which he violently attacked the governor and the court. The sheriff who permitted the speech was forced by criticism to resign. One of the grotesque features of the Overalls Parade, held in New York City, April 24th. Camels and elephants were dressed in overalls and formed an amusing element in the procession. The picture here shown was taken at Broadway and 23rd Street. Permission had been sought to have the parade take place on Fifth Avenue, but this had been refused. The parade had been hastily organized as a protest against profiteering and had only a few hundred in line, but an immense concourse of spectators lined the streets. First overall wedding on record at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York City, on April 24th, when Miss Gertrude Reinhardt became the bride of W. Ramsey Frederick. The bride was attired in blue chambray pantalette dress, costing $4, and groom, minister, and best man wore overalls. First aerial policeman in New England, with quarters in Old Orchard, Maine. His ship is a Curtiss airplane, and such cases as shipwrecks, forest fires, and drowning are in his line of patrol. The rapid development of aviation has made necessary a new set of laws governing navigation in the air, and the operator here shown, Harry E. Jones, is only a forerunner of an extensive aerial force. Military funeral of 19 men of the American Expeditionary Forces at Arlington Cemetery, Washington, D.C. A firing squad gave the requisite 3 volleys, and the trumpeter played taps, while the guard of honor stood at attention. The quiet reception with which the French met when they first entered Frankfurt was deceptive. At first, the population seemed stunned and apathetic. But on the day following the entry, the atmosphere grew more tense. A rumor had spread that the British were not in sympathy with the French action and had demanded that the troops be recalled. In the afternoon, crowds massed outside the Imperial Hotel, the headquarters of the French staff, and pressed excitedly against the cordon of Moroccan soldiers who were guarding the hotel, armed with automatic rifles and machine guns. Students added to the excitement by haranguing the throng. Their attitude became so menacing that they were ordered to stand back, and when they refused, the soldiers opened fire and killed 7 besides wounding others. The riot was quelled and the town has since been quiet. Photo caption: machine guns posted in the Imperial Hotel and commanding the square in front. It was in the vicinity of this hotel that the crowds became so threatening on April 7th that the troops fired into the throng. The guns are manned by colored soldiers. French soldiers with tanks patrolling the streets in Frankfurt after a hostile demonstration. French-Moroccan soldier on guard before the Café Hauptwache on Schillerplatz in Frankfurt. It was in this street that the French, assailed by jeers and threats, fired into the throng, killing 7 and wounding several. Belgian colors flying in the principal square of Frankfurt. At first, the occupation was carried out by French troops, but later, to demonstrate sympathy with the movement, Belgian troops were sent. Curious procession of Bolshevist agitators in the Quartier des Lilas, Paris. A detachment of the marchers, including children, are holding knives in their teeth. During the election campaign in France a few months ago, the government party had made large use of a poster showing a man holding a knife dripping with blood between his teeth, with the inscription, "What Bolshevism spells." The action of the paraders was in derision of this poster. Parade in Reval, the capital of Estonia, on the 2nd anniversary of the nation's independence, February 24, 1920. Estonia was formerly a province of Russia and later seceded, together with the other Baltic states. Government barges for navigation of the Mississippi launched at St. Louis. The Birmingham, self-propelled barge, costing $500,000, is here being christened. 3 of the largest liners in the world in dock at Southampton. At right is the Imperator, in the center is the Mauretania, and at left is the Adriatic. Most expensive hat in the world. It is a gift from 3,000 milliners of the United States to Madame Deschanel, the wife of the President of the French Republic. The great value of the hat lies in the plumes of the beautiful birds of paradise that are used to trim the black frame, which is made of Milan straw. There are 9 of these plumes, each worth $500 apiece, which makes a total of $4,500 for the feathers alone. Were it not a gift, it is doubtful whether the president's wife would venture to wear so costly a hat, considering the economic conditions in France and the strength of the socialist element. The lining is made of 48 pieces of silk, one for each state of the American Union. Dr. F. H. Milliner, standing, and H. L. Garmer, waiting for a sign from Mars. They were on a farm near Cedar Creek, Nebraska, and were utilizing miles of telegraph wire as antenna for their wireless. No signal, however, was detected. Episode in a recent game between the New York Yankees and the Philadelphia Athletics. Peckinpah of the Yankees was on base when a ball was hit hard, and he made a dash for the rubber. He left third and made for the plate while a crowd of enthusiastic fans cheered him on. The ball was smartly fielded, but he made a tremendous spurt and reached the rubber just as the ball was coming into the Athletic catcher, Perkins. Peckinpah is here seen sliding feet first into the home plate in a cloud of dust. George Kelly, the elongated first baseman of the Giants, who is filling the place made vacant by the defection of Hal Chase, is here seen in a close play at third in the Giant-Philadelphia game in the 9th inning. Miller is covering the bag. A play which caused considerable dispute is here shown as having occurred in a game between the Giants and the Phillies. Miller of the latter club is sliding in under McCarty's glove. McCarty doesn't seem to have touched him, but the umpire declared him out, and the decision stood. Funnels of the Martha Washington, with the shield showing that she is owned by the United States. She was formerly an Austrian liner, and was seized by this government. She set sail April 28th for South American ports, carrying passengers and freight. She is being operated by the Munson Company, under direction of U.S. Shipping Board. John Van Albert of Amsterdam, Holland, who arrived in United States April 22nd. He is 8 feet 5 inches high, wears 14 gloves, 9 1/4 hats, and 12 shoes. The new British submersible battleship M3 diving beneath the surface. The coming of this new creation had been predicted throughout the war, and this vessel is the first step toward its realization. The M3 under full steam, showing the conning tower, periscope, rangefinder, and exterior of the armored gun platform. The new undersea terror is to some extent a development of the submarine monitor. General view of the M3 on the surface. The resemblance of the bow to a marine monster showing its teeth is apparent at a glance. It far exceeds in power, speed, and strength any submarine vessel used during the war by the Allies or by Germany. Her steaming and diving took place recently along the British coast, and are reported to have been completely satisfactory. 25 students of the Polytechnic Institute in Brooklyn, New York, working in the Morris Park shops of the Long Island Railroad. More and more actual shop practice is being given in technical schools to supplement the work of the classroom, and these boys swarming over the locomotives are getting an actual insight into the working of machinery that will prove invaluable. Incident of the races between New and Magdalen colleges in England, when Merlin fell to his knees at the water jump. Mother's gift falling at the first jump in the National Hunt steeplechase at Cheltenham. Square up in a bad spill at the fence in the Rider's Handicap steeplechase at Garwick, throwing his rider headlong. A fall that occurred at one of the Oxford grinds, those of Christ Church College, when GS Sales Merlin went down, violently throwing his rider from the saddle. Jockey falling from Mingle in a sensational tumble at the last fence in the Novitiate steeplechase at Sandown Park, England. The horse turned a complete somersault, but neither he nor the jockey was hurt. The escape from injury was almost miraculous. French ambassador going in state to present his credentials at the Spanish court. Pomp and pageantry have always characterized that court more than any other in southwestern Europe. The royal carriages are always placed at the disposal of a foreign ambassador on the occasion of his presenting his credentials, and an imposing bodyguard adds to the picturesqueness of the function. Novel device in use for launching lifeboats in a hurry on the English coast. The boat is pushed into the water by means of a 40-foot spar attached to a tractor. It is also drawn from the water by the tractor after its work is done, as shown in the picture. Prince of Wales in a hotel bathing suit at Waikiki Beach, Honolulu, April 13, 1920. His democratic good fellowship, there as elsewhere, was strongly in evidence. In a canoe that was guided by Duke Kahanamoku, the famous swimmer, he paddled out to a reef where the surf was pounding in, and tried his luck with the surfboard. He was completely overturned, but quickly regained the board. Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr., son of Mr. and Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt, whose family has been prominent in New York for several generations. Miss Rachel Littleton, photographed at her home April 29th, just before her marriage to Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr. at St. Thomas's Church, New York City. The ceremony was an event in society circles. Miss Helen Moran, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Moran of New York City. She was one of the attendants on Miss Rachel Littleton when the latter became a bride. 500-pound wedding cake made for the Vanderbilt marriage. It was sliced in 1,000 pieces and served at the Littleton home. 20 pounds were sealed in a box to be opened on the couple's 25th anniversary. Some of the wedding gifts presented to Mr. Vanderbilt and his bride. They are said to aggregate $1 million in value. A tiara from the parents of the bridegroom was said to be valued at $300,000. Hobby horse used in the barbershop of a large department store in Chicago to make the children think that it's fun to have one's hair cut. The apron, too, has figures on it to engross the child's attention. Not a moving picture stunt, nor yet a real tragedy, but an illustration of how a Chicago man makes his living. He is demonstrating for an insurance company how painters fall and are killed. He has a long rope and springs attached to his back, which check him before he strikes. Machine used by the manufacturers of musical instrument wires to get the correct tone. The large fork vibrates 108 3/4 times a second, and the small one twice as many. May Day demonstration in Montreal, Canada, when local socialists and sympathizers with Lenin and Trotsky turned out en masse. There was a red flag displayed, which was immediately seized. Seaplane which was piloted from Miami, Florida to New York in record-breaking time of 15 hours 35 minutes. Mothership Camden and a squadron of submarines of the huge Atlantic Fleet at their anchorages in the Hudson River, where they were daily visited by thousands. Airplane view of the giant super dreadnought Pennsylvania, flagship of the fleet, flying the flag of Admiral Wilson at the foremast, and that of Secretary Daniels from the mainmast. The medieval exploits of Robin Hood and other picturesque rascals of ancient times have been rivaled of late by the performances of Max Hülse in Germany. Hülse was formerly an employee of a moving picture concern, but saw a more profitable and excitable occupation in banditry. Germany was seething with ferment and disorder, and Hülse found here his opportunity. He gathered together a motley band of disbanded soldiers, varying at times from a few hundreds to several thousands, established his headquarters at the castle of Falkenstein, famous as a nest of robber barons in older times, and proclaimed himself as Lord of the Vogtland of Saxony. From this place, he ruled for several weeks over the industrial centers of eastern Saxony. He laid tribute on towns and individuals, and in the event of his demands not being complied with, plundered and burned at will. The order of the German government at Berlin to lay down his arms and disband his troops was treated with contempt. One of his most notable exploits was the levying of a weekly contribution of 100,000 marks on the town of Plauen, one of the chief towns of the region. By his orders, the principal employers and merchants of the town assembled at a cafe, which was promptly surrounded by Hülse's troops. Later on, Hulse, who is described as an adroit and self-possessed speaker, arrived and addressed the gathering, elaborating his program and levying his tribute, which was accepted under duress. Similar acts were committed in other towns, and the whole district was swayed with an iron hand. The situation was complicated by the unwillingness of the labor elements to help repress Hulse's activities. Reichswehr troops were sent into Saxony to bring the bandit into subjection, but failed. Hulse finally decided to go over the border into Czechoslovakia, either in the hope of finding a new field for his depredations or more likely because the pursuit was getting too hot. Passports were secured through his emissaries, but Hulse had hardly crossed the border before he was seized by Czechoslovak soldiers at Marienbad, Bohemia, and imprisoned at Eger. The authorities of Saxony have demanded his extradition, and his brief career as a robber baron is probably at an end. Photo caption: Reichswehr troops passing through the village of Falkenstein on the trail of Hulse and his robber band. This impudent bandit had gathered a guerrilla force of about 5,000 men, with whom he sought to dominate and terrorize the industrial centers of eastern Saxony. He counted upon the disturbed state of Germany, and expected to operate with impunity. Villa burned and plundered in Saxony by the followers of Hulse, bandit who proclaimed himself Lord of the Vogtland. Castle Falkenstein, headquarters of the arch-thief and bold adventurer Max Hulse. It was an appropriate place, as for centuries it was the home of predatory barons. Ruined homes in the district where for a few weeks the notorious Hulse burned and robbed, defying alike the government and provincial authorities. The facts rival any romance. Kogane, Japan, and cherry blossom time. The magic of the season finds its way into the veins of the dreamy and romantic people of Japan, and puts them in a festive mood. Work is laid aside for a time, and, arraying themselves in fantastic costumes, they wander in groups beneath the cherry trees, playing musical instruments and reveling in the beauty of the place and time. Ueno Park, Tokyo, clothed in beauty with the cherry trees in full bloom. The Japanese are passionate lovers of flowers, which grow in wonderful profusion all over the country, and when the cherry trees burst into blossom, the whole population make festival. The spirit of Pan is in the face and gestures of this singer, who celebrates the magic and glory of the spring, while his audience, made up of all classes of the population, listen in rapt attention. Dead Man's Curve between Baltimore and Washington, known to motorists as one of the most dangerous pieces of road in the country, has been eliminated owing to the many deaths that have occurred there. At left is a cutoff, and another is shown at the upper right, which was the chief danger spot. Striking contrast between the old and the new as shown by the juxtaposition of the old Hudson Bay Fort and Trading Post, right, at Edmonton, and the new Alberta Provincial Parliament building. The old building has been recently demolished. Major Evelyn Wrench, Secretary of the English-speaking Union, presenting to Secretary of the Navy Daniels a check for £6,000. This is part of a fund collected in England by popular subscription in honor of the Dover Patrol, which kept the straits clear of German submarines. The United States Navy will use the fund to erect a monolith in New York Harbor. A. B. Creed, scientist of the Department of Agriculture in charge of plants. He developed and proved the theory that light, and not climate, controls plant growth. He is here shown placing violets in a dark chamber, where by cutting down their normal light, he can force them to produce blooms twice a year instead of one. Left to right are shown Admiral Kuntz, Secretary of the Navy Daniels, and Admiral Wilson, Commander of the Atlantic Fleet, on board of USS Pennsylvania, flagship of the fleet. This great tanker, whose enormous size from stem to stern is the first thing that strikes the eye, is remarkable in several respects. It has a capacity of 10,000 tons, and is to be delivered complete in 100 days from the time the keel was laid. If this is done, it will be a record for vessels of that size. It is being built on the Isherwood system of longitudinal construction, as distinguished from the transverse style commonly in vogue, and which has been a prolific cause of disaster in the case of vessels so constructed. The Isherwood system makes the chance of a ship breaking its back almost negligible. The ship is being constructed in the Moore Shipyard, Oakland, California. Giant Caproni machine on the sands of India, where it was a source of awe and wonder to the natives. It is one of the largest airplanes in the world. It has 900 horsepower. It is making a flight from Italy to Japan, and stopped at India for a brief space to rest and refit. Aerial car service between Rome and Milan, Italy is carried on by this great airplane. The cabin carries 10 passengers, and has all the luxuries and comforts of a first-class Pullman railroad car. Movable dam on Lake Erie branch of the New York State Barge Canal System. The location is on the Mohawk River, which in accordance with modern policy is made a part of the canal. Highest single lift lock in the world, located on the Erie branch of the Barge Canal at Little Falls, New York. It has a lift of 40.5 feet, which is higher than any single lift even of the Panama Canal. Old and new locks of the Barge Canal at Waterford, New York. The new structure has replaced the old canal locks, which can be seen at the right. There are 442.6 miles of construction in the new canal, and the enterprise has cost more than $150 million. Envy will be caused in many breasts by this picture of a coalfield at Tofield, Alberta, where the coal can be obtained at $3 per ton. It is surface coal, and the soil can be easily stripped away. Oxford-Cambridge relay team that captured the 2-mile race at the Pennsylvania Relay Carnival at Franklin Field, Philadelphia, May 1st. They set a new world's mark of 750.25. Largest stone crusher in the world that has just been installed in a Michigan quarry. It is a gigantic 60-inch affair, with a capacity of from 2,500 to 2,700 tons an hour. The crushing head weighs 65 tons. Great stone crusher, whose enormous size is indicated by a comparison with the men standing by it. The crusher was built in 90 working days in a Pennsylvania factory, and was transported to Michigan and set up in 11 days. Boys of Public School No. 40, New York City, passing down Fifth Avenue May 1st, 1920, in the Great Americanization demonstration in which more than 25,000 boys participated. There were 8 divisions in line, and the boys marched finely. Inauguration of George Washington as President of the United States, reenacted on the steps of the Sub-Treasury Building in Wall Street, New York, on the 131st anniversary of that event. The participants were in the costumes of that period, and the scene was arranged by the Constitutional League of America. Parade of schoolboys on Fifth Avenue passing 25th Street, New York on May 1st. The demonstration was for the purpose of showing loyalty to the Republic. There were many bands and floats showing phases of good citizenship, and the occasion was an impressive one. Enthusiastic spectators rushing to greet the victors of the first Aviation Derby, participated in by college airmen at Mitchell Field, near Garden City, Long Island. The Yale contestants, Horn and Tripp, won the race. Crew of the winning Yale airplane, photographed after their victorious flight. At left is J.T. Tripp, observer, and G.W. Horn, the pilot, is at right. The distance was 25 miles, and was covered by the victors in 16 minutes. It was a close contest, as Learsh of Pennsylvania was only 10 seconds behind. An event not on the program at the Intercollegiate Flying Meet was the feat of Sergeant Clarence Combs, who carried 3 passengers to a height of 16,500 feet in an hour, which is said to be a record for that number. Testing a parachute at the Intercollegiate Aviation Meet. Before the races were held, the crew of each plane tried out their parachutes, to be assured that they would prove dependable in case of accident. One of the parachutes is here shown being tested on the ground, with the wind trying its strength to the utmost. Airplane view of the great open-air stadium at San Diego, California. This enormous amphitheater is one of the largest in the world, and will seat 50,000 people. The Prince of Wales spoke there during his recent visit to this country, and President Wilson, by the aid of the Magnavox, addressed a vast audience. Captured German plane landing in a river. The incident occurred recently at McCook Field, Dayton, Ohio. Engine trouble developed when the aviator, Lieutenant L.L. Snow, was making a flight, and it became imperative that he should land at once. He chose the river instead of the treetops, and escaped with nothing worse than a wetting. The plane was a captured German Fokker, equipped with a Mercedes motor. Huge truck that takes the place of a locomotive. It is being run not in opposition to the railroad, but as auxiliary to it. It carries 80 passengers, and hauls a trailer loaded with freight and baggage a distance of 32 miles on about 6 gallons of gasoline. It is run in connection with the Lake Zurich and Wakanda Railroad. Ambassador Davis unfurling the American flag at Stratford-on-Avon, the occasion being the celebration of the birthday of Shakespeare. The ceremonies were impressive, and most of the other nations of the world paid a similar tribute to the memory of the myriad-minded man, who is the glory of the human race. When the armies of Denikin, Kolchak, and Yudenich collapsed, it seemed as though the triumph of the Bolshevist regime in Russia was final and complete. Recent events of great importance have contradicted this assumption. The Polish armies have made a great movement forward that has carried them as far as the important city of Kiev, which they have occupied. Ukrainian forces are operating with them in their offensive, and a treaty is said to have been made between the two nations. It is reported that Finland has been making great purchases of munitions and supplies, and the belief prevails that a renewal of the Finnish operations against Petrograd is impending. 3 additional divisions of Japanese troops have been thrown into Siberia. Signs point to an encircling military movement of the forces opposed to the Lenin-Trotsky government. That the latter are alarmed at the outlook is evident from proclamations that have come from Moscow. It was reported on May 11th that the Poles and Ukrainians had captured the Black Sea port of Odessa. Photo caption: Podol portion of ancient Kiev, chief city of the Ukraine, from which the Bolshevist forces were driven by Polish and Ukrainian troops May 6, 1920. Alexander Semenovich Medvedev, chairman of the Zemstvo of Vladivostok, reviewing the parade held in that city on the occasion of the 3rd anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Parade in honor of the 3rd anniversary of the establishment of Soviet rule in Russia, held at Vladivostok, Siberia, March 12th. The banners express dislike of Japanese occupation. Red troops with stacked arms in the streets of Vladivostok, on guard to repress a possible counter-revolution. Red star on arm of soldier at right is the new emblem of the Red Army. The 3rd anniversary of the establishment of Soviet government fell on March 12, 1920, and there were celebrations held in all parts of the vast domain in honor of the event. Nowhere was it commemorated with more zeal and enthusiasm than in Vladivostok, the great Siberian port. The withdrawal of other Allied troops from Siberia, including the American forces under General Graves, has left Japan as the only guardian of the interests of herself and the Allies in that country. But while she is in practical control, the municipal government, or Zemstvo, is strongly Bolshevist, and in the popular breast there is a sullen resentment against the presence of the foreigners. The anniversary celebrations gave an opportunity to vent this feeling, and the accompanying pictures show orators haranguing the crowds, and banners on which are inscribed protests against continued Japanese occupation. There was no pronounced disorder, however, as the Japanese troops patrolled the streets in force. There is no sign of their quitting Siberia, and recently 3 more divisions were added to the forces already there. Photo caption: Immense throngs of demonstrators in the streets of Vladivostok bearing banners protesting against control by the Japanese. Joseph Caillaux, former French premier, recently convicted, after a prolonged trial, of communication with the enemy, and sentenced to the loss of civil rights for 10 years and banishment from Paris and vicinity. Mother's Day in New York, May 9, 1920. Impressive ceremonies were held on that date on the Mall in Central Park. Mothers of Marines who had laid down their lives in the war set trees to commemorate the sacrifices of other mothers. Several of the Gold Star mothers are here shown engaged in their labor of love. The trees will be carefully tended and will serve to keep green the memories of devoted American patriots. Fannie Hurst, the well-known writer of short stories, and her husband, Jacques Danielson, principals in an unconventional marriage that has attracted recent attention. They have been married secretly for 5 years, but live apart, meeting occasionally. Members of the Court of the Queen of the May at Sweetbriar College, Sweetbriar, Virginia. Crowning the Queen of the May, Miss Elizabeth Vincent at Bryn Mawr College, Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. A large number of spectators, most of them relatives of the girls and alumni of the college, were present, and the occasion was one of much picturesqueness and charm. On the beautiful grounds of the campus, a maypole had been erected, garlanded with ribbons and flowers, and here the queen was crowned with all the ceremony befitting her state. All the punctilios proper to the occasion were observed. There were maids of honor, ladies-in-waiting, flower girls, etc. The dancing was especially graceful and attractive. National Convention of the Socialist Party of America, which opened in New York City May 8, 1920. 400 delegates were in attendance. It was expected that Eugene Debs, now in jail at Atlanta, Georgia, would be nominated for the presidency. Troubled Mexico is again in the throes of revolution, which so far, however, has been an almost bloodless one. The trouble began with the secession of the state of Sonora, whose example was promptly followed by neighboring states, until the movement became countrywide. The inciting cause was the allegation that in the forthcoming elections, which were scheduled to take place in June, Carranza was planning to manipulate the voting to serve his own ends. The leaders in the rebellion are Generals Obregón and González, whose popularity with the soldiers is so great that a majority of the troops seem to have gone over to them as soon as the signal was given. Mexico City, the capital, has been occupied by the rebels, and Carranza was reported May 12th to be in flight toward Veracruz, accompanied by a small body of adherents. The United States has dispatched destroyers and warships to Mexico to protect American interests should need arise. It is reported that La Huerta has been made provisional president by agreement between González and Obregón. Photo caption: an unusual photograph of Mexican troops, specially well equipped. It seems that the World War has had its effect on the accoutrement of the soldiers. Helmets have taken the place of sombreros. Mexican refugees who are fleeing northward before the advance of the revolutionary forces, hoping to enter this country. General Pershing left and President Lefebvre of Panama on the balcony of the presidential palace in Panama. The American commander has recently been making a careful study of the fortifications of the Panama Canal Zone. The screen almost perfected about the observation vessel. A favorable sea and suitable wind helped greatly in making the screen effective. 4 destroyers are seen in line laying down the dense volumes of smoke that cling closely to the surface of the water. Close-up of destroyer laying down smoke screen. As in the clash of armies on land, maneuvering for favored positions is very often the deciding factor in naval conflicts. With the advent of aircraft working in conjunction with the fleet and the further assistance of high-powered glasses, it became more and more necessary to screen the actions of naval units from their foes. Splendid view of the impenetrable wall of dense black smoke as seen from the gun deck of a United States warship during the recent maneuvers in the Pacific off the coast of Hawaii. The smokescreen lifting after having accomplished its purpose. The photographs on this page were recently taken when the flotilla of United States destroyers under the command of Captain Evans, son of the famous Fighting Bob, was practicing this art of sea camouflage. In addition to its offensive value, this greatly aids a crippled vessel to escape. The overalls movement that has spread so widely over America, and which, in connection with the old clothes movement, has doubtless done much to curb profiteering in clothing, has reached across the ocean and invaded London. Herewith are shown members of the staff of the Middle Classes Union in London arriving at their offices clothed in overalls. It will be noted that the women are not behind the men in this matter, as shown by their garments. Division of school children in the Social Democratic May Day demonstration in Berlin. They carry a banner which reads, "We demand a world school." Just what was meant by that the children probably did not know, and their carefree faces show that it did not weigh heavily upon them. The day in Berlin passed off without serious trouble on the part of the labor element. Concert outside the Reichstag building in Berlin, given on May 1st by members of the Musicians' Union. It was attended by enormous crowds. In the foreground is seen the Bismarck Monument. Labor orator holding forth to a great throng in Hyde Park, London on May 1st. Over his head flutters a red flag. The British government has viewed the approach of the day with considerable uneasiness, owing to general discontent among workmen. Labour's great demonstration in London, May 1st, the day that is traditionally given over to labor demonstrations. The parade, headed by ex-servicemen, is here seen leaving the Hyde Park embankment. The banner reading, 44 and no more, refers to the number of hours demanded as constituting a week's work. Fiery speeches were made by workmen's leaders, but there was nothing calling for police interference. House at Doorn, to which the ex-Kaiser has recently removed, after a stay of a year and a half at the castle of Count von Bentinck at Amerongen, Holland. The Doorn estate was purchased by the ex-Kaiser many months ago, but his removal to it has been deferred until certain changes could be made in the house and grounds. It is not an ostentatious dwelling, such as the royal fugitive has been accustomed to since birth, but rather resembles the home of a simple country gentleman. Care has been taken by the Dutch government to guard the estate and prevent any intrigues detrimental to Allied interests. Entrance to the former school for non-commissioned officers at Marienwerder, West Prussia, with Italian gendarmes on guard. The Italian flag flies before the building, which is now the headquarters of the Italian occupying forces. By the terms of the peace treaty, a plebiscite was to be taken in certain sections of West Prussia, where there is a large Polish as well as German population. The vote was to determine whether the region should be retained under German rule or be joined to Poland. To ensure a free vote, the Allies sent certain troops, including Italian forces, as seen in the accompanying pictures. They will police the districts during the taking of the vote. The necessity for their presence is proved by the intense agitation accompanied by many outbreaks that have occurred in the districts in question. Polish consular officials have been attacked by excited Germans and have only escaped injury by the intervention of occupying forces. The plebiscite in certain of the disputed districts was to have occurred May 12th, but on May 4th it was determined at a conference of Allied ambassadors, presided over by Paul Cambon, to postpone the vote until July 12th. The vote will then be considered by the League of Nations, which has the final decision. In the plebiscite taken in the Schleswig districts, however, the vote was regarded as final, and it will probably be so treated in the West Prussian and Silesian districts. Italian troops drawn up for review in the Great Square at Marienwerder, capital of West Prussia. They are part of the occupying forces. part of the fleet of submarine chasers lying at Port Newark, New Jersey, and ready for sale to any purchasers who may care to buy them, now that they are no longer needed for war purposes. Working Man's City on Wheels, owned by a logging company in the Pacific Northwest. This train of 11 cars can accommodate about 200 men. All the necessary facilities are installed, together with many comforts. Enormous crowds turned out in the Jewish quarter of New York City to pay their respects to David Kessler, the great Jewish actor and owner of one of the East Side theaters, who recently died. For many years, he has been one of the leading actors of his race. The crowd following the hearse was so dense that traffic was blocked. Preparing for the vast throngs of visitors who are expected to go to France this year to visit the graves of their dead. This rest house at the cemetery near St. Quentin, where many members of the 27th and 30th Divisions are buried, is a type of other houses at American military cemeteries. They are under the auspices of the YWCA, assisted by sympathetic French women. Police in Paris rushing to a point where a disturbance was in progress on May 1st. The disorders were not widely spread, nor did they result seriously, but the threat of them kept the police on the alert. Riot being checked at its beginning by Paris gendarmes. The fact that the railway strike began on the same day set for the labor parades complicated the situation, and strong police and military guards were posted at important points. L'Avenue de l'Opéra, usually one of the most crowded spots in Paris, as it appeared on the morning of May 1st, 1920. It was the day when the Great Labor Parade was to take place, and the air had been full of rumors of outbreaks and disorders. The police kept the streets clear as far as they could, and a great many people kept indoors to keep from being involved in possible trouble. While there were disturbances, they were, however, minor ones. Soldiers of the Yorkshire Regiment on patrol duty between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives during Holy Week. The Easter season is always a perplexing one for the authorities in Jerusalem. The streets are crowded with pilgrims belonging to various religious sects that are animated by a strong feeling of hostility to each other. Outbreaks are frequent, and the ordinary police are not equal to coping with them. A Greek priest being searched for hidden arms. Even his calling does not exempt him from the precautionary measure. No feuds are so fierce as religious ones, and it has long been a cause of scandal to the Christian world that Greeks, Armenians, and Latins in Palestine are constantly at swords' points. Armed guards had to keep them apart, even under Turkish rule, and stern measures have to be adopted by the present British authorities. British and Indian troops guarding St. Stephen's Gate, Jerusalem. It is so named because St. Stephen was supposed to have been stoned there. The Arab motto at left reads, "Strength is in unity, and unity is obtained by wisdom." Interior of the beautiful amphitheater at Arlington National Cemetery, Washington, D.C., thronged with people on the occasion of its dedication to America's glorious dead, May 15, 1920. Bird's eye view of the marble amphitheater at Arlington, which was dedicated with impressive ceremonies May 15th. Addresses were made by Secretaries Baker and Daniels. Fire at Princeton University, which destroyed Marquand Chapel and Dickinson Hall, and injured other buildings May 14th. Estimated loss is $300,000. Students helped firemen to extinguish the flames. Baseball is the American national game, but from recent developments in the sport, it may soon be more correct to call it the international game. Canada for many years has had members of the International League and the Toronto and Montreal teams class with the best in their circuit. Attempts have been made to introduce the game in England, but while it has aroused considerable interest, it has not yet supplanted cricket. In the Orient, however, especially in Japan, there is a very enthusiastic interest in the game, and some strong teams have been developed. The colleges there have played it for some years, and there are excellent nines in the universities of Keio and Waseda. Now other teams outside the colleges are becoming interested, and nines have been formed in the leading cities of Japan. Games are often played with American teams from the U.S. naval vessels temporarily in port, and this affords good practice for the Japanese players. When the Chicago and All-American teams made their journey around the world, they played some good games with the Japanese, and although naturally they won, they were given stiff opposition. Photo caption. The 9 here shown may incline one to the belief that Japan is going to regulate her national sport of wrestling to second place and install baseball in its stead. For all the members of this 9 are famous wrestlers of Japan, and still wear the top knot that indicated their calling, a fact that has won for them the sobriquet of the top knot team. They are heavy men, weighing from 200 pounds up, but considering their weight, they get around the bases with surprising agility. The quickness of eye demanded by wrestling makes them expert in judging the ball that comes from the pitcher's hand, and when they lean against the ball, it goes fast and far. One of the members of the Japanese Top Knot 9, so called because it is made up entirely of well-known wrestlers who still retain their top knots. The 9 has its headquarters in Tokyo, and has a large following, not only because it plays good ball, but because the wrestlers who compose it are old-time favorites. Their old athletic training stands them in good stead. Mr. Oka, chief of the Metropolitan Police Force of Tokyo, Japan, throwing in the first ball at a recent game in that city. There is great enthusiasm for the game in Japan, and many of the games are close and exciting. The rules in force are the same as in this country. Some excellent teams are being developed. Tent City Colony at Newark, New Jersey that has been established for homeless families under the direction of the municipal authorities, who have appropriated $25,000 for the purpose. The tents are being put up with amazing celerity by men who have had experience in the army. In order to help families that are unable to obtain apartments in the city of Berlin, Germany has erected barracks on vacant space that was formerly used as drilling grounds. Although a great contrast to the large buildings in the background, they are sanitary and comfortable. Denmark, in common with all European countries, is suffering from a shortage of dwelling houses. It has thrown open the jail at Copenhagen for temporarily homeless families. End of the famous Richmond of Civil War fame, which was burned May 13th at Eastport, Maine. She was built 62 years ago at Norfolk, Virginia. During the Civil War, she won fame in Farragut's squadron in the attack on New Orleans. She was 225 feet long, 43 feet wide, and 17 feet deep, and when she was a full-rigged warship, was equipped with 16 boilers. For many years, she had been laid up in the Delaware River, and was recently sold to be destroyed, for the purpose of securing the copper and other metals in her. She is here shown being burned on the beach at Eastport. The last man to leave the ship was Captain Turner, who can be seen at the stern hauling down the flag. Young athlete of the United States Marine Corps, Ray Wilson, beginning a long jaunt across the continent. A firing squad of 4 Marines is shown, ready to start him on his trip. He carries letters to the governors of states he will cross. His run will end in New York. Long-distance walker Joseph F. Mitkulin, who set out from his home in Croatia to walk around the world. He has now been walking for 18 years and a half, crossed 26 nations, and traveled 107,000 miles. In his book, here shown, he has pictures given him by the Prince of Wales, President Wilson, the President of China, and other celebrities. Rifle squads of the New York Police marching on Fifth Avenue in their annual parade, which this year took place on May 15th. The street was crowded to the curb with spectators, and admiration was freely expressed of the excellent marching and soldierly appearance of the men. Impressive view of the Great Police Parade looking up Fifth Avenue from 22nd Street. The playing of many bands enlivened the march, which was led by Mayor Hyland, Commissioner Enright, and other prominent city officials. For once, the weather was propitious, and the parade was one of the most successful ever held in the city. Annual rowing regatta recently held on the Grand Canal of Venice, Italy. It was the first that had taken place since the beginning of the war. The occasion was a gala one. A unique and picturesque scene that could only take place in Venice, the Queen City of the Adriatic. The decorated gondola here shown was one of the contestants in the gondola race. Finish of the varsity race at Princeton on Carnegie Lake, May 15th. Cornell was the winner and is here seen leading the race, with Princeton a half length behind and Yale a poor third. The time for the winner was 9 minutes 16 seconds. The Cornell freshman crew also scored a victory in its event. Pageant staged at Fordham University, New York, May 15th, representing Joan of Arc on her way to the coronation of Charles VII at Rheims. Martyrdom of Joan of Arc at the stake as shown in the pageant at Fordham University. 10,000 took part in the pageant, and 25,000 witnessed this representation of one of the most tragic events in history. Great throngs gathered on May 15th about the equestrian statue of Joan of Arc on Riverside Drive in Upper New York in honor of her canonization, which took place on the following day at St. Peter's in Rome. The statue was garlanded with flowers, and the crowd joined with a will in singing the Marseillaise in honor of the heroic Maid of Orleans, who crowned a French king and led his armies to victories. The canonization of Joan of Arc by the Pope on May 16th in Rome was celebrated the preceding day all over the world. New York's ceremonies were conducted at the Joan of Arc statue on Riverside Drive. Opening of the new $10 million Michigan Avenue Bridge in Chicago. In the accompanying pictures, the bridge is shown just prior to being lowered into position and as the completed structure. It is 20 years since the bridge was begun, but lawsuits, war, steel shortages, and labor troubles have held up the construction. Over 10,000 automobiles gaily decorated with flags and flowers crossed the bridge after it was declared open by Mayor Thompson. For those of you who made it to the end of the video, here's your bonus picture. I know it's just an advertisement, but I thought the art was cool. Alright, have a good day or night, everybody.